Welcome to another episode of the Group Up Podcast. We are here for the 6v6 blog debate, as I'm calling it, because I didn't want to call it the great 6v6 debate. We've had one of those, and this isn't necessarily that. This is going to be a discussion of the mammoth, behemoth blog that Aaron Keller dropped on us yesterday. Game director Aaron Keller gave us finally the team's perspective on how they view the whole 6v6 situation. It was a meaty read, and I have brought the squad with me to discuss every part of it. Already with his hands up, Samito in the top right. How you doing, Sam?
Dude, I'm good. And SVB, you might not be able to call this the great 6v6 blog debate. This might be the great Overwatch debate holistically, because the things that they talked about in that, from different formats, from even like, and you don't even just have +1. We have +1.5, because this could be the Nateson episode where like we've had Nate in our ear for 3 years talking about what if open queue could come back, if like a role queue hybrid. Like I think this is going to be a discussion about, just Overwatch as a whole. This goes way beyond 5v5 and 6v6. When Aaron kind of mentions different formats, and Freedo might get his hero bans finally. And it's crazy that Marvel announces theirs, and then now we're talking like, you could get that kind of format too. There's no limits here, and I think that's what was so exciting about the blog post. It was like the first time that we really got to genuinely have a discussion about a review in the last 8 years. 8 years. Review on the last 8 years. I had to look at the date. Oh my God. And figure out, what was right, what was wrong. And it's going to be really, really fun watching almost like a science experiment play out before our eyes of more competition coming to the space. And it'll be cool to see. So I'm pretty excited.
I think we're all excited. Yeah, I think it definitely was like a great touch point for the community where everyone's like, man, this is cool. We're getting this kind of insight, and we'll get more into, I think, props to Aaron for writing the blog at all. But first, let's continue to introduce the cast in the bottom right with some more elaborate backgrounds that maybe you want to give some insight into to the viewers. Spilo, how you doing?
Good. I wore my Avengers shirt just to try and fit in, but unfortunately, I think I'm just the awkward kid in the back of class. But yeah. Well, I just want to bring to light really quickly here. Big Kale, guys. We talk about big pharma, big tobacco. Big Kale's the real criminal for making all health things seem like really bad and really toxic and taste terrible, so it's actually Big Hill is an industry plant by big tobacco. So I just want to make sure that we're touching on the real important topics today.
I need at some point, I need to get some sort of guy from Big Tobacco to come have a great kale debate or something. Like,
I'll smoke him.
Listen, and there's a couple in Kentucky. It's not going to be hard for me to find, Spilo. I'll drag them on here for you.
All right, well, watching from potentially the sidelines along with me, I think he's as interested observer as I am. In the top left, it's Flats. Flats, how you doing?
Oh, I'm very interested observer today. I even got popcorn in the other room if I got to go make it in time. Like, I don't know how long it's going to go, but I got popcorn on deck. If I need it, we're good to go.
Absolutely. I think both Flats and I are of the same mind where we don't really care. I think we don't really care which direction it goes. We're just here for the ride. We're here to see the fun, and we're here to see the discussions.
I do have my own one, bomb to drop way later, but
okay. I'm sure plenty of bomb will drop, so before this turns into a minefield, let's introduce, in the bottom left is my man Freedo. Freedo, what's up?
What's up? Very happy to be on this show. I think the devs showed their willingness to be open-minded, and over the course of many decisions in like the past year, pretty happy with my decision to back these devs specifically, as they've improved a long list of things, including the monetization, free heroes, and now being completely open-minded to formats entirely. So just like Oprah Winfrey, give everybody anything they could have ever wanted. I mean, what more can we ask for from that? And first show I get to be on with Spilo, and I want to thank him so much for taking his time to be here with us. I'm, of course, incredibly envious of the wonderful head of hair he has, and will probably be distracted by it the entire time.
No, listen, I got the juice from Freedo in LA, man. My guy broke me down in all the lore from all the early Overwatch stuff. It was like I sat in Grandpa's knee and I got told all the juice that I wanted to know, man. It was crazy. Best hour there.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, and very happy to be on the show, man. We've got a lot to talk about. What a blog post, dude. Like that, not only do I think is like great for what we need to be talking about now, but just compared to any other blog post, the depth and the accuracy and the severity, like I wish this is how they always talk. Because there's a lot of these blog posts that I think were just kind of vague pointings to things, whereas there was so much meat here and transparency. It's everything we should want from their communication.
Absolutely. And again, I will reiterate now that I think big shout out to Aaron. I think there's a lot of, obviously, with the 6v6 has come a lot of discussion about Overwatch 1, bring back Overwatch 1, a lot of, nostalgia for the good times, and sometimes people say bring back Jeff, but for all of Jeff's strengths, he never communicated with this kind of transparency and openness, and I think Aaron feeling comfortable enough with the community and wanting to share enough with the community, I think is a big plus for us to be able to be like, okay, here's the game director telling you exactly what he thinks, acknowledging some of the faults, although we'll get into, I'm sure some disagreement will come over, I'm not sure you gave this enough credit, Aaron, versus you are overselling this, Aaron, but I still think big kudos to him to put it out there and put so much thought and effort into it. Appreciate that a lot. And there's a lot of meat to it, so what we will do, we will get into what I'll do is I'll read it, basically. Not all of it, but we'll go through each section of it. I'll try and pick out some of the key passages, key points that he made, and I want your guys' opinions on it because there is just so much. We kind of really need to break it down piece by piece. But before we get into that, I just want your overall thoughts on the blog itself. Like, is it a hit for you? Did it kind of answer your questions, or did it raise new questions? So we'll just go around. Sam, I'm saving you for last for this one. So I'll go to Spilo first. Spilo, big picture opinion on the blog. How did it feel?
I mean, I think probably makes a lot of people pretty happy, which is a pretty impressive task in of itself. And I think it came definitely from a standpoint of somebody that genuinely cares a lot about the game. I think maybe Aaron doesn't give off the same amount of obvious charisma that somebody like Jeff Kaplan did, but the guy cares a lot about the game. He's well spoken. And I think there was really no major negatives to the post. The only, if I were to nitpick, and I put a tweet on this yesterday, it was like, I want to make sure that they address the pain points of tank play, right? Because when we talk about the problems of 5v5 66, I really think the vast majority of it, maybe Sam would disagree to an extent, but I think the vast majority of it does revolve around tanking and what makes tanking feel bad. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more addressing that they're aware that that is an issue within the 5v5 format. Because I think no matter where you fall on the spectrum, whether you prefer 5v5 or not, it is a problem of solo tank. And I don't think that was specifically addressed. And as I said, I don't think that was even specifically addressed with my talk with Alec Dawson either. And I think that's my only one nitpick. But from a holistic standpoint, it feels like what we lacked there, we got so much other information about their approach to things, their vision with things. And while we may not have the same level of vision, we talked about it with Flat's last podcast about what's the direction of this company long term in terms of what makes Overwatch unique, in terms of what their plans are for the game. Pretty good idea. We have a pretty good idea of what their vision is. They're a lot more open to testing and trying things. They're a lot more open to aggressive changes, and they're just a lot more open, period, which I think are all good things. So obviously great blog post.
Okay, Spilo very happy, and yeah, good to point out that one nitpick. We'll get to that later when in the sections where Aaron starts talking about this, but good to kind of flag it up nice and early. Flats, how about you? What was your opinion, and was there any parts that you were like, oh, I was interested in this part? Hello guys, SEB here, and the Group Up podcast is back, and I'd like to take just 30 seconds of your time to talk to you about two quick things. Firstly, Patreon. If you enjoy the content, then please do consider supporting directly, because Patreon takes only about 10% of the money you give, where YouTube and Twitch take 40 and 50% respectively. So if you'd like to support the podcast, then that is the best way to do so. Secondly, if you're someone who enjoys video essays or detailed analysis of movies, TV, or anime, then please do check out my second channel, The Soak, where I'll be making videos about those kind of topics much more frequently, and where a lot of my attention will go beyond just Overwatch. It would mean the absolute world to me if you guys would check it out, but that's it for now. Let's head back to the discussion.
Well, I mean, it basically was, at least for me, it was like, okay, we finally, laid it all out on the table, and we're actually honest with ourselves, and it's not just... And I love both of you. It's not just Freedo and Sam just going at it with both oh, I saw this one tweet that has 17 likes. It didn't say it was, it wasn't Q times. Yeah, it was Q times, but it's the gameplay and it's all these things. And it's just laid everything out on the table. I loved that. But for me, the big one was definitely how drastic their Q time number changes were. Because it wasn't just a 20, 30, 50%. It was 100% or even double. The increase from if you went back to 6v6 today from 5v5 for DPS Q times is insane, to the point where I looked at it walking in, and I talked about it when I did my whole breakdown the other day. I said I kind of walked into this expecting to walk out a 6v6er because I was kind of pretty much there, and I read that and went, oh, never mind. Actually, that that can't happen. We can't do that. And the reason why was the average gamer doesn't want to sit in queue for like 15 minutes. Like they don't. Like they're just not going to. And me beforehand was like, well, what matters more, your gameplay or your queue time? Well, it doesn't matter if the queues are fast if nobody wants to play the fucking game. But if the game, even if it's decent, literally for 15-minute queues, well, now you only have really hardcore players because like casual players aren't going to want to sit through that. So I thought it was super interesting, and I thought it made great points for both sides, and it alluded that the problem is actually more DPS than tank, which I didn't totally think about because I do think tank is the big problem, but there's much more to the DPS problem. On people want to play that more than anything else, and that causes a problem in its own. It's like a good problem to have, but it's also a bad problem, and it's like how do you fix that? And there is no clear answer. That's what this made. Like this finally said, hey guys, there is no clear answer. Both have good and both have bad. Let's talk about it. And I think they nailed it.
Absolutely. Just a quick word, Freedo. I think Flats was echoing a little bit off of your headset there, so just bear that in mind, or whatever was coming from your end, it was echoing just a little bit, just a smidge, not too much.
Mine or
no, it was
No, it's
Freedo's. It was Freedo's. So just like maybe just the mic
Headset's
is a little
loud.
bit.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe just a mic. But yeah, I appreciate everything that Flats has raised there, and I do think it was a very comprehensive blog, and I do think that there's definitely a lot to say for both sides. You said there's a lot of points made. Even Aaron made some points, and some points that we can pick at as well that maybe Aaron didn't quite go into about where the 6v6 can come through. But yes, the queue time stood out as a really, really, and something we didn't have context to. We didn't really know the exact numbers, but to see the numbers and be like, oh, okay, it's that. All right. So I'm sure, Freedo, you had an interesting sort of feeling looking at that graph as well. And how did you feel about the blog overall?
Okay, blog overall. We've mentioned Aaron's leadership here for a bit. I want to mention that first because Jeff Kaplan had the charisma and the dev updates that everyone flocked to from around the entire gaming industry as like a superhero pop star that would jump on the BlizzCon stage and kick out the jams, and there's like explosions and guitar riffs, and he was a badass. But then you get this man off the main stage and onto a stream, talking to Fran or something, and she's like, why don't you change the meta? And he's like, what do you people even want? There's always going to be a meta. And sort of like, get off my lawn, kids. You don't know anything. And so behind the scenes, there was a lot of that. Okay. A lot of, you think you want it, but you don't. A lot of, why would you even ask us to do this? Why would you bother us with these questions? We're up here on the plane of Blizzard existence that you can't comprehend. And this is the exact opposite of that. I think this is Aaron, like full-fledged at his like peak game developer. What's his role? Director role, final form, and being able to take the entire community in a unifying force. I mean, I think this man should run for president if he's able to do this. Like, if he can solve this issue, I mean, we give him the reins to the entire castle, bro. Like, because I feel like he it came down the middle and made sure to speak to the emotions of all of it. And I was really happy to finally have some, let's say, credible voice from Blizzard to talk about this. But I also think, as Blizzard has to do always, every time they speak and open their mouths, they have to simultaneously pat themselves on the back and also distance from their own mistakes, as if like, we're really responsible for that. It's a thing that happened. Mistakes were made, of course. We'll get into that. There's like a lot of issues I have with even the evidence he brought up. So you brought up the queue time thing. You got to be careful with how information is ever presented, because looking at the thing, I think it says post-roll queue being implemented. These are the queue times. Of course, they're not going to show us the queue time numbers from the October patch, because why would they do that from this subset of players, right? So, I'm sure that I don't know if it's the overall average. I don't know if do we care more about the high-end player base, the low end? Of course, they're not going to do any of this stuff. You have to. The reason why I get this is because I tried, and I think, Spilo, did you study psychology? You use a lot of psychological terms in your content.
Part of my job the last 3 or 4 years, I had a lot of study of psychology. Yeah.
I had to drop out of psych because you have to take stats and math is terrible. But as a English guy, I was able to understand the principles behind stats, and stats can be manipulated very, very easily if you just like, let's just ignore this part of it or that part of it. And that's why I get really harsh on some of these things. So anyway, that's my general overview. I think they're baking in a lot of Blizzard BS in the middle of it, but overall the sentiment is great. This is the best version of the marketing BS communication we've ever had. So I'm grateful for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's funny to see, you know, Freedo kind of be like, you know what, there's a lot of crap in there, but I think it's right to raise that as well. As we said, there's a lot of stuff that gets glossed over, but it's understandable as well. You don't, at the end of the day, expect him to be like, yeah, we were fucking stupid, man. I don't know what we were cooking. So we'll see how we feel about each part of the blog. But now he's been very patient. I'm gonna take it to Sam. Sam, I think obviously this was the big moment for, I think, the 66 community in general. Probably partly
Can I
just
interject really quick?
Yeah, Spilo,
I'm
go ahead.
super sorry. One thing that Freedo highlighted really well there, in the contrast between Jeff and Aaron, which I think was really cool, is just that Aaron, you know, nobody's perfect, right? But Aaron brought leadership humility, which I think is a really unique perspective and something that Aaron has consistently done and done really well. It just goes to show that you don't have to be a rock star to do your job really well. You know, like Aaron has consistently been humble, admitted shortcomings, and communicated well. And I think that humility is like, when done well, is like people respect that. You know, I don't think that compromises anybody's respect in Aaron Killer whatsoever, which I think is, especially for somebody that, again, that's studied a lot of that kind of stuff, you know, just being open and vulnerable, I think is like, you know, that's dangerous with millions of people, right?
Yeah.
But it works. He did a good job. But yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I think good point. I think if I would have made it, I might get accused of being shill again, but I like Aaron a lot. So I will leave it at that. So Sam, to bring it to you, like I said,
Yeah.
I think it was a big moment for the not the OpenQ 66 community, just because I think that's something to be acknowledged was one, but also I think this is something you've been waiting on to understand where the devs come from. So
Yeah.
overall impressions.
I want to say one to add on. Aaron seems way more approachable. And that's where you have to give him credit, especially in the mass of all this. Like, you know, because back when it was Jeff too, it was still Blizzard, right? You know what I mean? It was, I don't want to say it was the golden age, but like, you know, there were still like, you know, you guys get what I'm saying. He seems really approachable, and I think this is all people wanted. It's never going to happen. Don't speak about it, because that's not productive. That doesn't help anybody. It's, you know, hey, these are the reasonings. I think overall the blog was great. It was honestly better than I expected. My expectations were on the floor. And the reason why I say it's better than I expected is because it's not the hard part about the 5v5 and 6v6 discussion is I think everyone desperately is trying to avoid opening the OpenQ can of worms, even though Hawk is in my DMs constantly, like arguing for OpenQ. He was
Hawk
screaming yesterday, dude. Actually, it wasn't even Iron. It was more so Hawk, because Hawk was like,
Really?
he literally, and I encouraged him to do this. He was like, you know, I might just like record an unlisted like 5-minute, 10-minute video talking to like send it to Alec or something, just like talking my thoughts about OpenQ and like how a hybrid could work. So I was like, dude, go ahead and do it. Like, you know, they might actually listen to what you have to say compared to like the old days with the pros where it's just, you know, Reiner and Discord going crazy. Like,
You said, dude.
yeah, I know. But look, you know, I really appreciate the insight. I think this is probably the first time we can actually have a meaningful discussion about it. I did have some qualms with some of the specifics they listed, but like this, not in a bad way where it's like, oh, screw these guys. Like this is like it can actually be a productive conversation. Like that we got to see the queue time average. Where are they now? Right? Like, were they better at the start of the game? Where like, because again, like now, and it's hard to make sure that data is 100%. Like, and I'm not saying, obviously, I think queue times did get better for most players in 5v5, but the questions I would have is one, where were they at when patches were good in 6v6 Rollock before the content stopped? Obviously, the ratio still matters, but Tank was definitely left in the worst spot post that, especially a lot of the original heroes, the higher up you went. Two, where are we at now? Because when 5v5 and Overwatch 2 first came out, you know, people were still trying things out. And I think people over time started to realize that a lot of tank players weren't really enjoying their role and their heroes anymore. So I'm really curious as to where it would be at now. Though I do appreciate the general, like, holistic insight as well. I'm not trying to discredit the whole thing at all. But that does lead me to more questions. And I just appreciate them opening up the rabbit hole. Because I think the next couple years for this genre, are going to be, and this is just kind of me enjoying game design and game theory a lot, where you're going to have Marvel Rivals, which is just saying, hey, we're not just doubling down on synergy. We're tripling down on synergy. Where like different characters in the lore can do like unique abilities and stuff. Like, you know, my Black Panther syncs up with magic and I get an extra teleporter, or Peter gets a symbiote suit, which is what Spider-Man Web of Shadows, one of the best games ever made. They have not remade it somehow, some way. If you guys have not seen that game from back in the day, it's the game where the meme with the Spider-Man with the helicopter crashing and he's like looking his head down and stuff. Super cool game. Symbiotes take over the world and you get to have a choice, like you're playing a Fallout game, to go the dark path or the light path. And it's awesome. They need to remake that game. If anybody sees this, Insomniac, you know what to do. Damn it. But no, it's going to be interesting to watch because you almost have two science experiments like kind of coming out in front of you, and it's going to force a lot of change. And I think that Aaron being willing to be more adaptable, to even talk about formats like hero bands, like Freedo's asked for a long time, for open queue players, for like guys like Hawk and Nate who are always like, I just want open queue. You know, it's a holistic view of like what Overwatch is and what it's meant to be and like why people play this genre in general. So we're finally getting away from a bit of the BR craze. But I think that it was a really good blog, very transparent. It definitely took me a lot to it was so much I had to process it all. And it took me some time to really gather my thoughts. But after sleeping on it and finally getting a good night's sleep after playing too many video games this week, I woke up pretty happy about it. So
yeah, I think the great thing is that, you know, we've obviously touched base on the blog many times, all of us, over the months and weeks. And I think a common sentiment amongst all the content creators that we've spoken to, and I think a large number of the especially older players, is that it just felt like Overwatch needed something. They needed to shake things up. It needed something different. And I think it's great to hear that they're looking at all of that. They're not like, no, we're just going to run it down 5v5 forever and it's going to be like this and we're just going to spend forever making balance patches. It's like great to see that they're like, maybe we'll go 6v6, maybe we'll go hybrid. I'm a big fan of the hybrid open queue. Obviously, Freedo tweeted about this as well, that like, you know, we'll get into that, but I'm a big believer in that. I got a Hawk DM being like, hey, yo, we're eating good. Like, this is what you were talking about, SCB. They mentioned that they want to do that. Let's go. Yeah. I got a Hawk DM too, so it's all good. It's definitely a good signs, whatever we may disagree or agree on when we come to the details of the blog. One thing I'll add before we do get to specifics is we have Gavin Winter in chat again, awesome dev, responsible for a lot of the competitive systems and stuff. So he's, you know, Gavin, be careful because you're going to chime in and I'm going to read if you say anything interesting. So devs, beware. I want you to feel free comfortable appearing in chat, but if you say something that's insightful, I will read it out. And Gavin says, it's complicated with queue times because various events can cause big short-term changes. Like when we released the Juno trial, support queues went way up. So I think that's probably one facet of what the devs felt like they didn't want to share the nitty-gritty because, as you guys have already alluded to, data can be so misleading sometimes. I think people try and present it as always factual, but again, it's like, did a good patch overlap with a good release of something else, like, you know, a hero, some important cosmetics, a mini mode? So I guess in the nitty-gritty, a lot can be lost. But I also think if we had access to all this data, we'd be able to pull some really interesting things to be like, oh, hey, here's a correlation here between the number of times they do this kind of patch versus, you know, it would be very interesting.
It looked like Spilo's background.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We'd have to...
Exactly.
And maybe the most surprising thing that he brought up in that was one of the biggest improvements to roll queue time was adding open queue again. So the DPS players left, which is a detail I completely forgot because I don't like that mode. But that, you know, that's a thing we maybe don't think about. And maybe we attribute the queue times and roll queue to something else. It's like, oh, they finally balanced the game and they added open queue because it was kind of the same time in 2020. And it's hard for me to remember exactly how that lined up. But around the time they were doing the 1-3-2 experiment, as an example, to improve queue times, they also did open queue, hoping to improve queue times because that was like the major thing they were working on as they were transitioning attention to Overwatch 2, like entirely, not adding any more content.
And I wonder where, like, what ranks in particular, because I feel like high rank players just like we're not playing very much open queue at all. So like maybe that's a lot of metal rank players too. But because like believe it or not, like a couple of my IRL buddies, I was playing basketball with them this weekend. Did not go well for me, boys. Did not go well for me. But they always play open queue, and he's just like, yeah, I just queue up open queue and play Lucia. I'm like, dude. I was like, why? And he's like, I don't know. Like, so a lot of the casual players still just like jump into open queue and they like it. So, people thought.
Coach some open queue players. They're all low rank players, all of them, but it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like open queue. And I think also there is an element of, and I'm sure Spilo, you will agree with this, like the environment you play in molds your own play. So I think the low standard of open queue means that the people playing in open queue aren't really getting that much better. Like the open queue top 500 is like plat roll queue level. Kind of.
I mean, yeah, any top 500 player could jump into open queue and hit. I don't even know if there is a rank 1 in open queue, but you'd hit rank 1 like instantly. Yeah, you'd hit it.
No shade. No shade to the open queue players who are like, "Fuck you, you're removing my top 500 SCV." But okay, let's get into it then. So are you prepared, fellas? We'll go through all the major sections and we'll dwell on any points that you guys feel are significant. So I'm going to pull some of it up on stream and I'll read important bits. If you guys want to have some bits as well, if there's like, oh wait, I really want to talk about this sentence, SVB, feel free to be like, okay, SVB, I want to talk about that. And again, with 5 of us being in this call and with so much, to say, feel free to start chiming in now. We've had good, everyone's had their turn now. But now, if you really want to say something, at least raise your hand. If you really want to interject. Raise your hand is great too, and I will do my job to kind of just make sure everyone has a fair say and everyone can kind of speak.
Let's get a buzzer.
Yeah.
We should get buzzers. Oh, is there an integration on Discord for that? That'd be pretty funny.
I don't know if the Discord integration. There's probably a website for it, but I mean, I should have set that up beforehand if I knew you guys wanted buzzers. But we'll see. Maybe just make a noise when you want to talk, like I don't really like what he's saying. Okay. Well, so basically, you guys have a bit of free reign, but obviously, if anything untoward is said, I'll step in. So, first, we'll start with the historical context. So, Aaron starts his blog off by summarizing, which I think is relevant for players who maybe have not been around for 8 years, what actually happened. Because I think a lot of people do forget there was, for example, no hero limits at one time in Overwatch. Like, you could pick 6 Winstons. I don't think there's that much interest in this as like I don't think anyone thinks this was ever a good idea. In fact, I think Aaron undersells how bad an idea it was. Like, I think he's like, oh, we lost some creativity. And I'm like, I think this was just ass. I think if this was Overwatch...
Hanamura. Oh, no.
Exactly. I think if this was
I skipped that section. I just skipped it altogether. I was like, there's no point.
I think if any significant part of Overwatch was this, it would have never been even remotely successful. But...
Wait, hold on. But that was the Game of the Year format. SVB. That's when the game was at its best, I thought. Right?
They removed that
limits?
so fast. They removed that.
I was in a few months.
The best part about No Limits was the Harambe meme where the 6 Winstons jumped over Volskaya, and I will never forget it because that was Harambe. Honestly, like, hot take, Harambe helped Winston a lot become a big meme. That helped a lot. Where
is this discussion going? I came here for intellectual.
Listen, I live in Cincinnati. I have to shout out my guy Harambe.
And I'm getting Big Kelp and Harambe. Sorry, Big Kale, not Big Kelp.
Kale,
Big
dude. Yikes,
yeah, what is this, SpongeBob?
Yeah, that's SCV's a plan. He can't even get it right.
I'm a plan too. Fucking let's go on the tobacco. All in on the tobacco. Make that tobacco money. Let's go. Okay, so.
This point is important to me, though, because I think what we haven't addressed properly is the change in community perception and expectations from that launch era compared to now. Because then no one was critical at all of the balancing. It didn't even have a competitive format whatsoever. There was no ranked mode for a while. It was a wacky game. It was a wacky game even after they took out No Limits. Like it didn't function as a competitive game for a long time, which was a lot of our criticism, or mine anyway, for years trying to steer them towards that. I mean, people wanted roll queue immediately, pretty much, because of how chaotic it was. Like, you forget what it's like to play Overwatch with 6 DPS. And we can say it's a joke, right? But it was a very different game. And an important quote that I pulled in my receipt hunting through these debates was Jeff Kaplan in the 132 Experiment post said that prior to roll queue, most Overwatch matches were played with 1 tank or less. Most means 50% or more. That's pretty insane when you consider the most playable version of the game we thought at the time was 2-2-2, right? And that's kind of the issue, the dichotomy here. So I just want to say, as much as it's easy to be like, well, Overwatch 2, worst Steam review in history, Overwatch 1, game of the year, obvious, one's worse, one's better. It's like the expectations were totally different back then. The game of the year status of Overwatch 1 had a lot to do with the novelty of it. It was so different from all the militaristic shooters at the time. It was an entirely different kind of genre. It was refreshing. It was the new Blizzard game after a decade or whatever. There's a lot of reasons, has nothing to do with the competitive viability of the game. And in fact, they did not even care about the competitive viability of the game. I was begging them to for years. And they kind of like were forced to do it by Bobby Kotick wanting a competitive league, which eventually folded, which is rest in peace. But we did get Spilo out of it. So I kind of an uptrade, just saying.
You're seeing it with Marvel Rivals right now. Like like from my limited experience, even playing the most recent patch, it's not a balanced game at all. It's just fun. It's just a lot of fun. And there's a lot of really cool characters. And I think that like over the course of a game's age, the competitive viability, maybe it's just the cynical age that we live in right now, does become more and more important.
I believe the devs said they're not going to balance it, right? Like intentionally. I thought I saw that somewhere. Someone fact check me, but I think they're intentionally not going to try to balance Marvel Rivals to make all the kind of to be the anti-Overwatch.
Nerf.
Well, what Synergy was saying with Sam is a great example. Like that has like huge balance ramifications, and they just don't care because it's fun, So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth on this point because that's I'm very glad, Freedo, that you kind of pointed that stuff out because I was going to say, like, is there anyone who wants to dwell on the no limits part? And I think something else worth dwelling on that's relevant to the section on no limits is that the industry has changed a lot since what Overwatch launched as and how we felt, how players felt at the time. I'll maybe take it to Flats. Flats, maybe you want to paint a picture of like how you feel maybe the industry has changed from when Overwatch 1 launched, Game of the Year, and there wasn't really these competitors that we see now that have emerged since, and quite likely because of Overwatch. So yeah, give us some context if you wouldn't mind.
I think Freedo either is gonna love this or hate this. I have no idea what. I can't wait. But my perspective is actually super different of early Overwatch because I didn't start playing till season 3. Because Overwatch when it first launched looked like garbage to me. I was retired Siege at that point, but I was still playing Siege. I was actually playing Arc, I think, at the time. Like I was like enjoying my little retirement. And I remember looking at this game because all my friends were playing it, and I was like, this game looks ass. Like it's just like cartoony and like it's trying to be a shooter game, but like it's not really because like there's all these weird ass abilities and they're not like real abilities. Like I played Siege. Like you have like breaching charges, you have grenades, you have smokes, you have like more goofy shit like shields on top of a gun, right? Like weird shit. But like to me, it was a little too far. But my friends all loved it, and I ended up getting dragged into playing it. But I didn't play very much or at all during that beginning phase of No Limits because when I did play the No Limits at all, it was awful. Like I was like, this is so dumb. Like there's what are we doing? Like this is just you just like throw each other, like you just throw clumps of meat at each other until somebody wins. And so 2016 Overwatch, I don't think was Game of the Year in the early stage, like the very beginning. I think that there was a lot of hype building up to Overwatch because it was something new and shiny, and there was what was it called? It was like viewer watch or like only watch, where you like nobody could get in, so everyone was just watching people play it. And if you go back and look at the screenshots of like the first days, there's like Tim the Tatman's like top row, and it's like 6K viewers, and it's like it's a very different landscape of gaming and streaming at that time. When we think of the biggest game on the planet at that point, that is still like that's like Marvel Rivals launch right now. Like Marvel Rivals at this current moment with its drops is like just as hype in amount of people, if not probably bigger than 2016 launch Overwatch.
How much of that is player viewership numbers versus player numbers? Like that just might be a stream versus playtime discrepancy.
That is true, but I feel like as gaming grew, both of those numbers should grow together, though. Like more people that are viewing content are also aligns with like the amount of people who play games, right? Obviously, I think since like 2020, 2021, 2022, I would argue that it's probably pulled back a bit. That was probably like the peak of gaming was like COVID, because everyone was at home. But like Overwatch 2 launch versus Overwatch 1 launch, like we'd have to fact check all the numbers. I bet was insanely bigger than Overwatch 1's launch. And most people probably don't even think about that. So to me, 2016 Overwatch is like once you got past the no limits and got into open queue. And that's when like the game really started, at least for me personally. And I don't think people even really remember how bad no limits was, because most players literally didn't play it.
Sam.
Couple things. One, to compare the Overwatch 2 launch though, would you it's hard for me to word this. One, the game's free, and two, would you say I think the Overwatch 2 launch, if it was bigger, generally that would you say because the gaming ecosystem was bigger and more accessible as well? Because I would say I would say Overwatch was the gateway game from the classic era to the modern era of gaming. It did loot boxes better than most games. I mean, I don't think Fortnite would have happened the way that it did if Overwatch had not kind of pioneered like what the space was. But funny enough, Flats, my story with Overwatch and getting into the game is actually identical to that. I played for a little bit in No Hero Limits. It was cool to like mess around with. Like Minecraft PvP was still pretty big at the time. But I actually didn't really start getting into the game until after they removed the hero limits, because like people were kind of scrimming and it was like double Lucio, double Tracer, double Monkey. Yeah. And I just I played a little bit of that. But what really got me into the game is when they removed the hero limits, and that's when I started grinding. When did the hero limits were gone before season 1 of competitive, right? How long was it?
It did take a while for them to start even making competitive, so I can't quite remember. These things are hard. It's so many years ago, man.
Yeah,
I know the Only Watch era was like
that was the beta
many
right?
months before
that was
release,
the Only Watch,
which
was
in May 2016, and Only Watch lasted a while actually.
So I'm not sure. I think I'm pretty sure hero limits were gone by June, July. They were definitely gone before the first competitive season. The first competitive season, or were they? I think they were.
I think so. I think I'm
only a couple months max for sure. It wasn't so long, but considering there was so much visibility of the game with the Only Watch era as well, I don't know. Maybe it feels longer to me. I wasn't in the beta. I mean, you had to be really exclusive, like classic creator with a connection at Blizzard to get into the Only Watch beta, and we weren't invited.
Yeah. Okay, so interesting, but yeah, my experience is pretty similar. I think though, around that point in time, if the point of this is kind of to compare Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2, I would say that you still had more freedom to express your hero identity. And granted, people hadn't figured out the game yet. Absolutely true, 100%. People hadn't really figured out what's busted. Symmetra and Torb were like F tier pit. Somehow Steve-O made it work. I don't know how he did that, but and Mengichu too also had a little bit of a sin that he would pull out for no reason. But I feel like the exploration towards the starting phase of the game wasn't only because people hadn't learned the game, but there was just more to do on your character. Though a couple heroes were left behind as well. I'm not sure how deep I want to go on that. I think there's a lot to go into it. I'm not sure if it's really worth us hard discussing hero limits.
I think I want to talk on roll queue, but open hero limits is like,
yeah,
we can't even remember.
The game launched with 4 roles.
No, well, I think the point that's what I was kind of saying as well. Is like yes, there was attack and defense, so that was the whole thing. I think that's exactly the point I wanted to make, though. Is that the thing about the no limits was that it was so irrelevant to what actually was known for Overwatch. Even you guys have illustrated here that like you either didn't play or barely have any recollection of no hero limits. So to tell our stories of how we got into Overwatch, I was just a Blizzard fanboy. So I wasn't a content creator. I hadn't even played an FPS game before. So I was just like, oh, hey, a new Blizzard game. They always make great games, so I'll play that. That again, another indicator of the change of era. Back then, there were lots of people like me who would just play anything Blizzard put out, who were like, Blizzard are going to make awesome killer games, so let me try them. But I don't really even remember much early Overwatch. My memories start with the comp season, basically, where I was like, okay, I want to start grinding. I was like, gold plat type level when I started. And I was like, oh, I need to start grinding. Started watching some Your Overwatch guides to be like, yo, how do I get better at this game? And that's how eventually the journey went. But I think for most people it was irrelevant, like the no limit. So I don't even think that was relevant as a format. Spilo, do you have anything you want to chime in just to kind of round out the historical, or if you're good to move on?
No, I have a unique perspective, I think, because I think I started around season 7 as an extremely casual player and spent a long time in lower ranks. So I have a lot to say when we get to roll queue, but no. Sure.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, I think while it was a thing that we can bring up and say, do you guys even... It kind of feels to me like, when people bring up that Bastion had a shield in the beta, which I also didn't play. It feels like that, where it's like, yes, that was a thing, but it was kind of irrelevant. Like, it never really was a thing in the game. It may have been like a funny thing we can draw out. But I view no hero limits as that, where it's like, yeah, nobody really wanted that. So this is where Aaron talks about the second large change to the game format was open queue, to open queue, basically. So, and he says, I think this is one point that's worth dwelling on as well. He says that the change from no limits and future decisions was limiting match variety as well as player freedom and creativity in order to create a more balanced, consistent, and competitive experience for players. Do we kind of largely agree with that sentiment? Do we largely agree that a lot of the changes have limited some creativity but come at the sanity or the reliability of the game, or is that something we disagree with? Flats, you're nodding.
No, I mean, I don't think it was possible to balance as long as you had 6 of one character. That's impossible. So, yep.
Well, it also becomes like a creativity through like limiting rules. Like there's always a balance there, because if you have no limits, then especially in higher ranks, there's only a certain number of compositions that are viable because you're able to abuse stacking. Like we talk about like the tank stacking and the Zen stacking and stuff like that. And we saw that with Goats to an extent as well, though, you know, we don't want to open that rabbit hole. But basic TLDR is that like you don't necessarily have more freedom with more options. Because
Right.
what you do is you make the extreme strengths or the extreme weaknesses like more of a problem. Like, oh, you could go 5 Symmetras. Yeah, but it would be cheeks. Like it's not even worth putting time into. All you're doing is you're holding your ranked teammates hostage, you know, if anything.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think Freedo's smiling because he's going to think what I've been thinking, which is this is another argument for hero bans, which is the logic goes that more options is or more theoretical options equals more practical options. But this is a perfect example. This is what I was saying when I was reading this blog yesterday, was that this is actually an example of where limiting creativity, quote unquote, actually opened up the game more. Because if, as Spilo said, like if you could run 6 Winstons, and that was just so much far and away better than trying to run a 2-2-2 or, you know, any split of the roles, and you were going to run 6 Winstons, whereas actually limiting the like no more than 1 hero per role, per hero, per team, whatever, words, difficult. You get what I mean. It opens the game up. It actually meant more compositions were being played.
And one more point too, because I know it's going to be said, oh, but why are we balancing for the top 1% of people getting them in max? That is total bull. The nature of the gaming community right now, we are all min-maxing. Everybody's min-maxing. If you really want to talk about rock, paper, scissors, counter swapping, the plats and golds are worse than the high rank players at it, because everyone thinks that that's the way to squeeze out the value. So they're going to counter swap till kingdom come. And that's the irony, is that like, obviously in that situation, they would see, oh, that's the proper meta, and they try to force that on their ranked teammates. And so like, it's not just, oh, a high rank thing. That would trickle all the way down to the lowest ranks. I promise you.
A key takeaway from the no limits era to me is Jeff and the team. They said it was fundamental to the design of the game. Just to think of how they came across it. And if you compare, this is part of the struggle that we had getting them to make the game competitive to any degree, is if you look compared to a game like Valorant, where they went and got the map designer of Cash from Counter-Strike. Okay, you make the maps. They got Morello, who was the balance guy for League of Legends for many years. They tried to make a competitive team, whereas Team 4 made WoW and was trying to make WoW again. And then even when they made Overwatch, we're still trying to make WoW again. They just kept trying to make WoW, no matter what. So that early launch Game of the Year version of the game, in many ways, it was special because it wasn't trying to be competitive. But then nerds like me and the rest of us, and we top-down balancing, competitive viability, all of the things we agree on about like competitive meta, it's like speaking another language to them because they don't care about anything Spilo just said in his previous bit. Instead, Jeff would try to say, well, it's about the individual having the choice to do anything always, which is why there was no limits. And it was, you know, the first nonsense pillar we had to knock down in order to try to bring the game closer to competitive viability.
I also vividly remember that quote, and that was the thing that the devs stood on for a while until they thankfully saw sense relatively quickly on that one. So it is, again, relevant to point out when we talk about, because I think some people still have this very foggy image of Jeff, like he's this like loving father figure in the back, and they think that like he was always, everything he did was right and rosy. And when we say, I think Aaron's doing a lot of good things, people are like, you guys fucking Jeff slander, Jeff was awesome, you guys are just eating off of Aaron's palm. But like, there were a lot of sticks in the mud that the devs just planted. They were like, no, this is fundamental to the game, and you had to really dislodge them to get a sane game. Okay, so let's move on then to OpenQ. Aaron doesn't dedicate necessarily a huge amount of paragraphs to OpenQ, just a couple. But I do think it's worth us discussing because they later go on talking about, well, maybe we get a hybrid system. So a couple things that Aaron flags, basically. He says that, yeah, it kind of gave teams a lot of choice and freedom of what competitions to play, but there were quite a few problems. And the number one problem, he says, is kind of damage was by far, and is still today, the most popular role, and tank was by far the least popular. In fact, seeing matches with 5 or even 6 damage players on each team was not uncommon, and this led to wildly imbalanced matches. Let's talk about this for a second. Sam,
Just
the
quick
imbalance of the
interjection.
roles. Go ahead.
It didn't just lead to that. It led to a couple funny Overwatch animations. I don't know if you guys remember those, of like the Overwatch animations from like 2018, where it's like an animation of people locking in characters and then flaming each other.
Yeah.
A classic.
The whole
But
I want to be a tracer thing. I swear, like had some of that as well. I think, but yeah, I remember those.
yeah. So let's talk imbalance between roles. I mean, especially when it comes to the medal ranks, I would say, because when you started to get up to high ranks, you started to see way more stability, because people would generally try to pick the more optimal things to win. Did they do that every time? No. But you did see that a lot more, like kids forcing goats. It's my GM game, please. Like, let's go goats. Stuff like that. It's definitely a downside to OpenQ. That being said, back in the day, I don't think everything was done to mitigate that, but you at the end of the day, you're never going to. When people come on the game, a lot of people are going to want to play DPS. I would say that DPS, because it's supposed to be the superstar, right? That's where also the most heroes were at the time. How many tank heroes were out in like original OpenQ? Like 7 or 8?
There was
8? 7 or 8. Son. Okay, I'll look this up while you guys discuss.
So I don't know. I think I also had there was also trouble like finding some supports back in like the Moth meta too, when it was like hard meta for Mercy. I don't think that's something you'll ever get rid of. I think that the only way that you can try to make it enticing is to offer good products that are engaging and build good communities around them. I think they did a great job of making Doomfist a tank, for example. In the support category, you have like the Mercy Mans. Like, you have to create characters that have a lot of loyalist players that make them want to sit there and play. But to be honest, that's definitely the biggest downside to OpenQ if you're just going at it completely raw with I guess I had insane deja vu, by the way. What is happening? Oh my God. I guess I had the craziest deja vu. That's so weird. Oh my God. I'm freaking out a little bit.
Did you take a gummy, Sam? I know that's the thing you Snap back to reality.
I got my salted peanuts today.
Oh,
so.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie with you. I thought when you walked over, I thought that was a thing of protein powder, and you're just like chowing down.
I thought it was protein powder too.
This guy, it was definitely doing cocaine. Like, something is off, man. I've always been suspicious, but now I'm sure.
Unfortunately, I have this much energy naturally. So apologies to Miss Gross, my third grade teacher.
So, quick piece of context: there was 5 tanks. Believe it or not, that's it.
Prior to Orisa, because it was pre-Orisa.
Yeah, well, Orisa was a while. Diva.
I thought it was in OpenQ.
Yeah, in OpenQ.
I'm talking like the life of OpenQ though. Like, I don't want to just limit it to like the.
But even then, it's only. Then seven,
yeah,
or 7 or 8, because Sigma and Wrecking Ball, like bam, bam, right?
Well, Sigma came with role queue. Sigma came with role queue. So it was just
so then Wrecking Ball.
So that'd be 7 by the time OpenQ ends. So 5. We went from 5 to 7 in the journey of OpenQ.
Okay, yeah, definitely. There definitely was less of an offering. Now, if you had more of an offering, would that completely solve the problem like some people like to claim? No, it wouldn't. But I would love to have seen how a hero like Junker Queen would appeal to DPS players who would consider flexing to tank. I would love to see how a hero like... Okay, we all know that Doomfist players would fist on no matter what. They got really mad at me. I said they're the Mercy players of tank. Like, they'll play Doomfist and literally...
Kind of real for that, though.
Yeah, I know. I'm not wrong. I'm not, So look, I think that's absolutely a big downside to OpenQ, but at the same time, that's also like a lot of player exploration. And I've been doing a lot of reflection on what makes this game fun and like why people play this genre, and people play them for the heroes, right? So if your hero offering isn't very compelling or enticing, people aren't going to play it. And now tank would still be probably the least queued role, but I'm very curious what would happen if they had a crack at it with what they know now, with the cast now as well. So the role disparities that will always be there. You're never going to get them even. You don't have to get them even. But it definitely was a problem, especially for medal rank players who are like, I don't care. I'm here to play this hero. This is the game I like, and I'm here to play this hero, and I'm not going to flex. And that definitely probably a bigger issue in the medal ranks than the high ranks, where people are willing to flex more. But that's most of the players, so it's definitely a big downside to OpenQ.
Spilo, how about you? I feel like you're kind of wanting to say something about the role
Yeah,
discrepancy here.
I think like just the play devil's advocate. I think that the whole like goats being used as an argument against role queue is not lazy, but it's a flawed argument potentially because I think, as Sam and I have discussed many times, support stacking, the lack of sustained balancing. I mean, the team at the time obviously nerfed a lot of the tanks and a lot of the supports, but no offense, the original balance team was totally incompetent, and they weren't incapable of balancing goats appropriately. Now, would support stacking and tank stacking remain OP without role queue? Maybe, but I don't think it's a fair argument to say that with 100% certainty, right? So, like, is open queue impossible because people just can lock all tanks and supports? Maybe, I don't know, but there's like a way to balance that out. My biggest complaint with OpenQ, and I know that this is something that some people out there are like, oh, it's not as big of an issue, but they're coming from a bias that I think is really, really dangerous. Is I was a silver, gold, bronze, plat player for a long time, the entirety of OpenQ, really, and I think was it Freedo who said it a second ago about the most of the ranked games were like 3.
It was in the blog.
That's how it was. That's how it was. That's how it was. And I think the vast majority of like the open queue mouthpieces are the higher ranked players who didn't have to deal with that. And I'm sorry, your just opinion doesn't matter that much in that regard because the vast majority, 90% of ranked players got screwed over with open queue. And so maybe that would be alleviated with what Sam is talking about, making the tank rules a lot more self-sufficient, whether it's with the heal passive or having much more interesting tank designs. But it was actually funny because I was talking about this on stream yesterday where I felt like a lot of tank players were actually boosted in open queue because just your willingness to play tank gave your team a significant advantage because there were so many games that people didn't want to play tank or didn't want to play support, usually tank. And then your tank would have, one support because 4 DPS, and he would tilt, he'd swap Roadhog, or he'd go Widowmaker because the DPS aren't getting picks. And I'm sorry, Iron or whoever else is arguing for OpenQ. You're not part of the vast majority of the population, and that's probably true in higher ranks where people were flexing and filling, and people were more comfortable and had better. But that just isn't the vast majority of the population, and I don't see that changing. I don't see that changing after where OpenQ is a legitimate thing. I really just don't. I wish it could, because I actually think that there is some creativity there, and I do think it is possible to balance around stacking tanks and supports. I just don't think it's a problem that they're ever going to solve. And I think it's a huge mark against the quality of games, because I remember playing at that time in those ranked games, and it sucked. It sucked. It affected my hero pool. I hated playing tank. I got forced into playing tank. I got forced into playing support. I felt like, and like, I actually, maybe Freedo will remember this. This is where a lot of the Elo Hell stuff started to come around. There was a lot of like conspiracy theory about Elo Hell because match quality was super, super volatile because of that. Like, unbelievable. You talk about 5v5 being volatile because of one fewer player. Bro, 66 open queue match quality was unbelievably volatile because of that kind of stuff.
Question.
It was tough.
Do you guys? Well, we'll get to it later. I'll let these guys go first. We'll get to it later. We're definitely get to it later.
I'll go to Freedo first because kind of Spilo is directly kind of saying that, like, is that how you remember it too?
Yes, that's very accurate. And of course, I think I came onto your content, SVB, when you were handling issues like this with viral videos on the gold experience and stuff like things like that I was very interested in. And I would say that's the biggest issue with OpenQ, that the more viable way to play the game, whether it was 2 tanks or 3 to 4, which many metas were, that's all meta depending, character depending, new hero release depending, that all varies. But having a gap between like what the competitive game should be, and letting sort of the Lord of the Flies social conditioning occur of the randoms that want to play 6 DPS unironically, and teaching that as like attempting to be an educator for these players. It's like, where's the on ramp to be like, well, as Ana this game, you're a DPS because there is no tank, so you got to take DPS angles. When in reality, most players prefer sort of the comfy nature of a couple brawly tanks in front of them, so they all hold hands and heal the tank and go in together, and that's like the baseline standard gameplay that people want to have. Then you have that removed, and so all of that variability made the game utter chaos as far as I'm concerned. And I totally agree with the getting boosted by playing things. I mean, this was my entire career in Overwatch 1. Like, I wasn't going to get to top 500 without exploiting meta synergies and strategies. And I looked back doing research, to talk about this subject for these past few months, like looking through old videos, and I'm like, I'm actually shocked at how bad my Grandmaster gameplay looks. I'm like, holy shit, do I look terrible as a player? I'm a better player now, like skill set wise, with aim and reaction and everything. I'm actually better, like one-to-one visual comparison, but my rank's much lower because the mechanics and difficulty and the direct confrontation of Overwatch 2 is way more intense. Whereas you could both in 6v6 and its general 6v6 point, but you can hide as a player much more. Aaron does mention this. And also there's a huge boost to just playing the teamwork thing that everyone needed to function, whether that's a Reinhardt anchoring on meta positions, moving things in with a shield, or maybe the team needs a Lucio just to function. There's a lot of like these gateways in order to rank up. And frankly, if we do fully go back to 6v6, I'd be ecstatic for my SR to go up and my content to increase, because this is my wheelhouse, bro. Like these like easy paths to understanding the game. I mean, great. I'm all for that. So
I will say one thing. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but I don't like having 6v6 and role queue being like in the same argument. Like I know that they were applicable in the same time, but I do think that they're different things. Like I don't necessarily think that somebody would be boosted in a 6v6 environment. I think somebody could be boosted in an open queue environment. You kind of see what I'm saying? I think that's the more bigger concern.
Yes. I mean, I think Aaron did tell you this in the blog. I'm trying to remember. Role queue did make it more confrontational because it's like, as opposed to solving the equation of a playable match, which you could do if you're a flex player like me or my buddy Nathan, who's also was here from the launch of the game, you're going to have a reliable competitive game, let's say, in terms of the same comp against each other. So that actually made the skill set and the execution mechanically, especially on any given role, much more required. It's like I could play a competent Reinhardt in the front if the team just didn't have one, and the enemy especially didn't have one. That would be a huge boost to your win potential. Whereas now, both teams will always have a tank in any role queue scenario. Completely agree. One last point on the role queue thing. It made like quick play was even worse. For everything we just said, like we kind of narrow in on competitive.
So
but in Overwatch 1, there was way more quick play players. Now it's skewed a bit more towards more playtime and ranked, I believe. But regardless, a huge section of the game isn't interested in competitive and wants to play quick play. And I felt quick play was unplayable in this era of the game.
In open queue, you mean, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember this too, because back then it was like, I think now quick play is sweatier as well. Like now the devs approach it themselves where they're like, oh, quick play is a serious mode. But back then I remember quick play was like the mode you went in to practice and stuff, and you just couldn't. Yeah. You couldn't, because it was like everyone else was also trying to just, I want to play some DPS, man. I don't get to play DPS in comp. I'm trying to play some DPS now. And it was like impossible to practice. So it was, yes, I think for whatever the detractors of role queue may have, the place where it was most effective was by far and away quick play. Like it made quick play sane and playable in a way that it wasn't before. Sam, quick word from you before I take it to Flats on something I want to ask your opinion on. Okay, Flats, I was going to ask you, I think obviously there's a lot of insight about open queue, but does Marvel Rivals open queue give you any more insight into the situation of Overwatch or how open queue can or couldn't work?
I'm gonna like half disregard like the Marvel Rivals part just because I've been waiting for something about open queue for so long.
Go for it.
No, you're fine. I know that this with 5 people it's really hard. I think if you want open queue low key, you're just kind of insane. I like you are extremely biased. And I think Freedo's 100% right about the whole like being boosted thing if you just pick something. And I actually had that experience when I swapped to PC because I was a console player. I was a console pro, and I was decently mechanically talented. And I could just get away with that. And that's how I got to GM on console, just literally bullying people by just walking up and just hitting 3 shots in a row, and they couldn't. And then I got hard stuck like 3,500 because mechanically on PC was a lot harder because I'd never played on a mouse and keyboard in my entire life. So it was like all the games since I had learned up to that point, plus more. And then like mechanically, I just couldn't push to that ceiling. And then, I was playing like a friend, and like we ended up doing like some team stuff, and they were just like, oh, like, can you play tank for this, this tonight? Like, we just need a tank. And then like, oh, I was like, I'm going to play a little bit of tank this week. Boom, hit GM in like literally 6 days. And so it was one of those things that, hearing you say like, if you could win a game by literally just having a Ryan in front of your team and it doesn't, like, I think that's just stupid. It's like, yeah, they just pick the hero and they win the game. That's almost like the same thing as like the counter swap meta we have today. It's like, oh, they have this hero, I pick this hero and I just win. And I think that it's almost like a lesser evil, and it's just not good. And it's also part of the reason why GM Top 500 used to be the promised land of every casual. They always wanted to be GM Top 500, and they would always say if you streamed or watched the stream or watched a video, and they'd always be like, "Oh, my games don't look like this. I wish I was Top 500. I wish I had those good teammates," because you had people calming. You had a lot of the pros that actually gave a shit. They would actually try. You kind of saw the same names every day, but they actually didn't sit there on an alt account out of voice in a Discord call with one person. Like you'd always, like everyone was actively trying to win. And so you would get those swaps when you needed them. You would get those situations where, oh, so and so, doesn't know how to play this hero very well. Oh, that's okay. We can switch out because I'm a pretty good flex player. But the large majority of players, like, they want to go play like just support. And like I'll tie this to the Marvel Rivals part you were talking about before, SVB, or the question. We've been playing like 3-4 stack, like me, Karq, Jay, Emong, and we have been having a blast with rolling games. And then last night we all got off except Karq. And I came back to the stream like 3 hours later, and like he was winning literally every game, but like he wasn't having very much fun because of OpenQ, and that he wants to play support. It doesn't matter. He's not one tricking. He just wants to play support and fill a little bit of DPS. But any game where you get a game where you don't have 2 tanks, you just lose. And so you'd have the diplomatic endeavors of typing in chat like, oh hey, like I can play DPS or I can play support if anyone plays tank, like I can swap with you, or if any of the supports play tank, I can play support, because they're like he's flexing to DPS, and like everyone just sits there and grumbles and goes, oh, well, I can't really do it, or well, I'm trying, why don't you just try, And it just was ass. It was shit. And it was you don't have the structure of the game at that point in the sense of creativity. And I think it's something that is super biased to like high level play. And like if you ever played in those metal ranks in OpenQ, it wasn't a great time. You were not climbing. You typically would get that game where, and I think that's when the hatred of one tricks really started. Whereas you'd get the one trick Mercy or the one trick Lucio or the one trick whatever, and it's like, well, we just lose the game now because you know what I mean. Like they just don't want to swap, and you need people to swap, and nobody wants to swap. And so let's say you have 2 one-trick support players, and it's like the supports that they're playing aren't the most optimal. So then the DPS players that were maybe thinking about that they would swap are now not going to swap because they're like, you won't fucking swap, then I'm not swapping either. We're all going to sit there and hold this lobby hostage, even though, like it is winnable. Like you're just not going to do it. And it just was a more shit experience, and I bet Rivals could end up going the route of some type of role queue. I could see it happening, but at this current moment, it's fun and it's goofy, and it's gonna probably stay that way for a while. But if the game, when it releases, becomes competitive as like 6 months, 9 months go by, and people legitimately want to play the game more often, I don't think you can keep it an open queue. It's just not viable, and I think that tying OpenQ to 6v6 is not a good idea. It's very different. And even an OpenQ and 5v5, I think is kind of terrible.
Well, Rivals novelty as well, because everyone wants to play everything right now. But how long does that last, right? Because everyone's got I want to play Venom, or I want to play this because there's new things. But eventually people are going to be like, oh, I like these heroes.
All right, Sam,
and then you're screwed.
You've been very patient, so I want to take it to you.
I don't think it's fair to say that you lose an open queue when you don't have 2 tanks. I won play, and again, at least in Rivals right now. Now there are open queue issues. I think a lot of that could be player psychology too, and that definitely still is it still is like a little bit of a knock on open queue. But at least playing Rivals, like I've won a ton of games playing like solo tank with triple DPS, and like you could still win a ton of games like that in Overwatch open queue as well. I do agree that we definitely need to keep the 6v6 and open queue discussions separate because like they are a little bit interesting. And I believe Aaron's next paragraph is where he talks about SVB, your potential hybrid, which is where we could take this conversation next if that's actually next on the list, if I'm recalling correctly. But, it definitely is a player psych issue. I ran into some guy last night who was inting on Spider-Man, and then he was like talking trash to me, feeling Loki, who's pretty fun. And then he was like, what rank were you in Overwatch? I was Diamond. You should listen to me. And I was like, I hate to break it to you, buddy. I hate to break it to you. And then my teammates were like, you do realize that like this guy played pro, right? And he was like, no, he didn't. Shut up. And it was just a big back and forth. And then the guy finished like 0-7 on Spider-Man. And I was like, yeah, don't.
That's a classic.
Yeah. He felt pretty dumb after. But yeah, it's tough. I actually hope Rivals doesn't go from open queue because I want to see what happens. I want to see a head-to-head of what happens in that game in the same format when Overwatch is in some kind of role queue or role queue hybrid. Now, granted, that's more of the me wanting to just see how things unfold and maybe get some good results as to what's going on. But not to go too off topic there, I don't think that it's fair to say that it's 100% on open queue when somebody's not. Now, if you get a tank, like, it does make a big difference. I'm not trying to say like in the games where you have 5 DPS or 2 supports and 4 DPS that getting one tank won't make a difference. But I think that there's a lot of situations where you do get one tank that the game's still winnable. That's going to get into a lot of theory that I don't think is productive from this point on. It's just speculation, but
Sure.
I do feel like the pain points they're there, but how much of it is psychological and how much of it is like the actual, like, the game is unwinnable. I'm not sure.
Two things super fast would be Marvel Rivals needs to incorporate the out of combat heal passive, right?
Yes.
So that addresses
I
one
wanted
of
to
the
bring that up. Yes.
And then one of the problems with Overwatch in terms of solo, I agree with Sam. Solo tank was a big deal, but even like a solo tank could be difficult because of 2 CP and choke design in Overwatch. So if Marvel Rivals can avoid choke-oriented maps, you might be able to get away more with open queue because there's a lot more free creativity for supports and DPS to take space if it's not a choke. And Overwatch had so many chokes that you just couldn't
Intentionally.
Well,
intentional. Right.
Here's what you do: just make it so you could destroy the map on Anubis. And
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go. There you go.
Imagine
I mean,
that.
don't get me
or
started.
Paris,
Don't get me started on the destructible shit because I hate that. I fucking hate the Marvel.
I actually don't
Rivals
mind
Yeah, me
it.
too.
I hate it.
We'll get to it. I don't
but
mind it.
I
I
mean,
seen on a team because the fucking ceiling fell on them and they couldn't get out, and so they couldn't touch the point and they lost. That is so fucking stupid.
I got fucking trapped under some rubble, bro. Like, some rubble just broke on
It was
top of
you.
me.
You know what? We need more realism in our games.
it was like
I need Spider-Man to be able
payload
to Spider-Man needs to be able to have to poop after like an hour of play time. You know, we need to be like the characters have to eat. You know, we need like a lot more realism.
Lunch breaks. You know.
Yeah.
It's
Also
like
disease, like, you know. Stuff
It's
like
like
that.
it's like an episode of 24, right? Where it's like in the first few seasons he never goes to sleep, and then they're like, okay, we need to have him start going to sleep at some point. So here's like an hour where he's going to sleep.
Exactly.
I'll just say a quick thing. As someone who is a believer in hybrid open queue, I'll say a quick things and also try and channel what like Nate and Hawk have said to me in various discussions, because I think I'm in a call with a lot of anti open queue. I think there's a few. Undoubtedly, those pain points are all correct that you guys have listed, like the struggle of trying to get people to actually play a competent comp. I think one thing that it does allow, I mean, firstly, it's more casual, which is both good and bad. Like, I think what makes Marvel Rivals fun is the like wacky nature of it, and that's why they obviously know role queue exists. They've seen Overwatch, they've seen other games, they've seen, like, you know, MOBAs have this too, where you could play without a role queue, but it sanitizes the game. I think the reason they've gone for not open queue is because it's more wacky, it's more open, it's more potentially fun, as Aaron talks about in his blog as well. Higher highs, lower lows. And I think that was part of the appeal of the original launch of Overwatch. It was that wacky, crazy game before people solved it. And I do think that there's been 2 culture shifts that have occurred, I think, in gaming over that time. One is, I think, the sweatiness of gaming in general has increased. I think, like, with the propensity of pro play now being so frequent, like every game has pro play, we want to solve games more quickly. But also one thing that I know Hawk has been talking to me about is that this kind of predates the era of having a main role. I think that, like, the thing about open queue is that at the time, and I remember coaching so many players. Like, I remember being a middle rank player. I remember then being like GM top 500 and then coaching middle rank players. Open queue speaks a lot more to what at least were, this may be different now, but what were people's actual hero pools, which is like, oh, I like Diva and I like Sombra and I like Brig. And I want to be able to kind of like play those 3 heroes. I think we now live in an era, and this could be a fair argument for not implementing open queue anymore, that maybe we've shifted as a player base in Overwatch. Now we have an era where people are like, I'm a support main, I'm a tank main, and you just play 3 heroes from that role. Like, we've kind of solidified that as an ideology, and even you can see this in content creators, right? It's like Flats, you're associated with tanks. ML7 is like the support guy. In Karku, you said like he wants to play supports because he's like the support guy. But back then, and yeah, you still had famous one tricks. You still had Seagull, known for his Genji. You had Shadowburn, known for his Pharah or whatever. But I think the general population of the player base were kind of like more open to just trying different roles. And so I think it did to some extent reflect how people wanted to play, which is like, I want to be able to swap from tank to support in the middle of a game. Sam.
Yes, but yes. And I definitely do miss some of that flexibility from being like, I'm a more flexible player. Like if my supports are struggling, I like being able to like swap to that. Like in rivals, there definitely are some benefits to me being able to do what I want. That being said, though, I think the bottom line is for most players too, a lot of them are playing the game for the heroes, right? They like how much of that has changed because we forced role queue and you were forced. Sorry, let me be specific because I think this is something that we could all do better. We don't have role queue right now. We have role lock. And especially if we're going to end up talking about your idea, SVB, that is role queue. We have role lock right now. So when role lock happens, I think people, of course, get even more caged into what their role actually is that they play. But I would say that's partially true, but also people.
Can you define those two just for people that are confused?
Sure.
Sorry.
So what we say, we have called this role queue for years, but it's not really role queue. We have role lock, and what role lock is you queue up for a role, and you can only pick heroes in that role. You are locked into the role that you queue into, and because of that, the queue times and the ratio of players queuing between each role is super important. Role queue would be there's still no limits. It's open queue, but you would be able to select essentially a preferred role that you would want to play. And so the matchmaker, while it would be open queue still, and you could still switch to what you want, it would essentially try to find, a fair team. So it's like the clip of XQC where he got 5. What did he get? 5 Mercy or 5 Ana players? What did he get? That one iconic clip where he opened up. He had Ana players. He had like 4 Ana players on one team. The matchmaker could then still try to put at least one support on one team, one tank on one team for people who want to play what they want, but you maintain the flexibility. Now, there are a lot of things that could come alongside that could be problematic, but I just want to define those things. We are in role lock. We never really got role queue. It's kind of like when Blizzard implemented hero pools and everyone was like, we have hero bans. It's like, no, not really. This is hero pools they're choosing our heroes for. So
not hero pools.
Yeah. So I think it's important to make that distinction and just make sure that's known. But we'll see. I think a lot of that is there is some truth to that, but also at the same time, it's like I think people just like to play like they play Overwatch. They play the hero shooter genre because they have a hero, generally speaking, that they're attached to. And I guess you could say it's a role to some degree. I think it's a bit of both, though. I don't think it's all or nothing for one.
For sure. I think it's, again, this is where it'd be interesting because this is also speaking of to like what my memory was at the time. But that may have evolved. I mean, my memory might be biased, but also they may have evolved. Like as you said, I don't really remember an era before this where your people were tied so much to a role. But now it definitely feels like that. It definitely feels like people identify with their roles a lot more. Like I definitely see a divide between the DPS community, the support community, the tank community. Like it's very clear now in a way that I don't ever remember it being in the open queue era.
And how much of that preference is like
like
survivorship bias, versus just the evolution of the gaming community as a whole?
Exactly. That's
because you can say all the open queue fans are gone, but we don't know that really.
Yeah, which makes this whole thing so hard. We're discussing in sort of philosophy and speculation, and it's so hard to test, which is why it's not an enviable job to kind of decide the format of the game because you're going to speculate that X number of people prefer 6v6 or X number of people prefer open queue, and finding actual data to kind of say this is with certainty we can say this is what's going to happen is really hard. So
being one of the older creators on the call, I think I'll chime in on this. I think what you're describing is the competitive specialization that was apparent in the pro community. So you had the flex support, the flex DPS, and that kind of tied together because the skill sets were either similar or the role was similar. So you would play a similar position from a competitive point of view. But at the launch of the game for sure, and for an extended period of time, I'd say we were still appealing to an RPG fantasy a little bit more heavily. And over the course of years, we kicking and screaming, we dragged them away from the MMO aspirations towards it being a competitive game. So that's kind of describes that. So I tend to agree with a lot of the overall consensus of it. I think that like the people who are just tied to a hero is definitely the least it's ever been. And I think maybe that describes our community a bit more. Like, I think I loved when Flats was like, well, you could kind of counterpick an open queue because there's a clip of me on this show where I'm getting vilified for saying I was a flex pick guy who filled in to counter the enemy team. But that was the whole basis of what open queue was. Like you would dominate if you knew how to do that, and your team would love you for it. Because if you didn't do it, you had an unplayable game. And so I personally, I'm always going to be resistant to anything that opens the social aspect of the game to ruin the baseline competitive experience. I'm always going to be hesitant to that because I remember those dark times of not really having a team comp and no one really knowing how to play it. It's like the strange thing is you could learn the very vast array of playstyles. Like you could learn how to play 1 tank, 4 DPS, 1 mercy. Hold on, I did the math on that right. There was like a 1 mercy DPS
the wrecking
comp with
ball.
1 tank.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you could learn that, but like the community doesn't necessarily know how to. So the viability, this is another thing that might try to thread in this conversation, but a lot of the viability of strategies in Overwatch are based on the community's understanding of them, of like, I go in at this time. And if you look at like a meta rank player, the big problem was they're always playing as if they have a Reinhardt. They just go down the choke.
Yeah.
And that's not how you need a position with some of these other comps. And once you get to the promised land of GM or whatever, as Flats is saying, it's like everyone's sort of positioning to adapt to the situation. And it just takes so much more game knowledge to do that, which is why they've slowly made it more specialized over time to give a reliable experience that most people can understand. So much so that we've dumbed it down to the point of 1 gigatank in front. Everyone gets that. Okay? You go to point and we'll screw off to the side. Everyone, it's like a baseline thing that you can adapt to. So drawing that entire arc, I think, makes that even clearer how it's evolved over time. So I'm glad we're able to like look back in the history books to see how this has evolved.
I remember one time my teammates flamed me for not playing Zenyatta when we were playing Goats in like Diamond Ranked. And I'm like, guys, they're on like 4 DPS. You don't play Zen. Zen Goats is for Goats Mirror, you morons. Like you're supposed to pick Moira or Ana. And they had no clue, but they didn't understand that. They're like, you play Zen in Goats, dot. And it's like exactly what Freedo's saying. People don't understand the context at all of like why these heroes are being played or how. And so it's hard.
I think why people like that though is that it was on them to explore it.
Right.
Right. And I think that's what that Hawk and even some of my other casual friends who still play open queue, it's like, you know, the difference is in like what's the game, what's the purpose of the game? It's for the player to play, right? And while it wasn't all, they weren't always doing the optimal thing, a lot of casual players liked it being in their hands to go make their own choices. They don't want the game to feel like it's playing for you, or else I'd be playing
Auto battlers,
like-
let's say.
yeah, Balloon
Yeah.
CD, right? You know, so
Yeah.
it's interesting to listen to it and think about it. I'd have to put more thought into it myself, because honestly, as time has gone on, I've gone more. Nate is slowly dragging me to his side. I'm not sure where I stand on it quite yet, because
Didn't
I
you
was
say
a
the
huge
opposite
role
though?
guy.
Like,
You
if you
can. I
wanna
was just supposed to say that,
play-
Class.
Yeah, like if you like your experience is like I want to play this, and it's like you can't play this because the like what you have
Sometimes.
been dealt to you as a teammates as like what everyone's picking is not allowed, and it's like you have 2 choices: you just lose the fucking game, or
There
you
were
be
times
that
like
guy
that.
who swaps and you end up doing the thing that you didn't want to do to then let everyone else play their game. Yeah, so
There are
Everyone
sometimes
always
it's a
comes
bit
to
of both.
me. Everyone's always coming to me, oh, Elo Hell, because I got the 3 Mercy mains every other game, you know, and like obviously that's not true, but it's like it just introduced this like social factor that like made a lot of people feel helpless.
I think like almost everything in this, it's just, again, it's like it comes with cost benefit, right? It's like, and as
Yeah.
Aaron said, it's like the higher highs and lower lows. I think that's essentially how you can summarize the whole era of open queue. Is when it worked far better than role queue does. Like it kind of being able to swap from tank to support to make the game work was like a huge thing, but the frequency of it was very small compared to, again, the frequency at which you lose the game because like it's an unwinnable comp. But also, that is also why I'm interested in the idea of a hybrid, because I do think, and we'll get to that later, because I do think that there is something to take from open queue. There's something that can add to what Overwatch brings by incorporating at least some element of that. And if we are able to find a happy marriage, I think it would be worth exploring. So, okay, any more thoughts on the open queue era before we move on to role queue era? Okay, cool. Let's do this then. So Aaron talks about, well, we moved to role queue to solve many of these problems, the problems that you guys have talked about as well. He talks about this, what we just mentioned, that they solidified the identity of each role, and the fancy of what doing your job is became clearer. However, the switch to role queue came with some downsides, the largest of which was queue time. Something we didn't even mention, actually, which is another underrated part of the open queue, is that Marvel Rivals instant queue times, because you just, fuck it, press button, 6 people in the lobby,
Instant.
off you go.
even
Whereas, yeah, exactly. Whereas and then that will happen, because all you need is 12 players who are silver. Boom.
high
Off you
level
go.
ranked, by the way. Like when you get the thing in the bottom right says like above 99.5% of players, like it's
30
still
seconds. Yeah.
instant.
Right, which is another part of the casual thing, I think, is like, for a casual player, queue times are anathema to like whatever, what is that the right word? Yeah, they're like the opposite of what you want, right? They just like absolutely kill playing the like if you're not playing the game, you're mad. So that's something that Aaron talks about. That was one downside. He says the team tried to address this imbalance in various ways. We introduced a priority pass system that gave players who were playing a low demand role, brackets tank, a shorter queue time when they switched to damage. And this had a positive effect for several weeks, but its influence quickly faded. Let's dwell on this for a second, just because I think these kind of solutions can be potentially revisited or incorporated to some way in Overwatch. So priority passes, again, to reiterate for anyone who wasn't there, they'd offer a priority pass. The game would offer a priority pass if you flex queued, which meant you played tank. And then you could use then there were 2 queues for when you were queuing a priority role. 90% of the time that was DPS. So there was you'd see the screen that said, hey, if you un-priority pass, it's like a 20-minute queue. Priority pass, it's like a 10-minute queue. And so essentially it created like a black market where you had to have a priority pass to really play DPS. So Sam, you got your hands up. You want to talk about priority passes first?
I would have loved to have seen how that system worked when the tank meta wasn't Orisa Hog Sig Ball. I would have loved that. I think there was too much emphasis on it. But I think at that point, when were they introduced? Do we remember the dates? I think at that point it was 2020, correct? Or I don't think that happened in 2019. Am I wrong?
It's all a blur to me, man.
It's all. I don't remember the exact dates on that. I think it kind of sucks how that system turned out. I don't think that's the devs' fault at all. I just wish that if that system was in the game, I think it would have been cool to have them not have Giga buffed Hog, made Orisa not be headshot by Fortify, kind of never really properly addressed double shield. I would have loved to have seen how the queue times would work. And this might be more where my level of play was for the casual play. I think they said the average queue times for most players in Overwatch 1 were around like 6 minutes or something like that. I think that was in Morgan's tweet. But we'll see. I'm curious. And again, this is where Freedo mentioned this, and I think it would be cool to see like the actual timeline of each season, like what were the queue times there, what were here, how much were passes being used. But I think I don't know. I would have loved to have seen that happen when they had more tanks in the game, and especially when the high level meta was not just double shield consistently, or tanks that just I don't think Orisa or even Hog players are that much fun to play in a role lock format. I think Hog was the only tank that I think really just kind of needs to suck in role lock. He's just not. He was at his best as a hero for a flex for someone like Jonak to pick Zen on Junkertown or pick a Hog on Junkertown instead of Zen. I went on a tangent there. Sorry.
No. So priority, no, it's a good point. And you're saying basically, yeah, it would be nice to see what priority pass would have been like, maybe in a better game state, in a better balance state. Actually, we have quickly. I'll let Gavin Winter chime in. He says, possible hot take, but I think priority passes will probably never have a big impact. They're trying to leverage an extrinsic reward, and our players have very intrinsic motivations. To elaborate for anyone who maybe doesn't understand those words, extrinsic reward meaning like you still have to play support, but you're getting rewarded out of the game to say, hey, here's a priority pass. Whereas most people play to get the reward in the game, during the game, to be like, oh yeah, I'm having fun playing support. So yeah, making someone do a chore can potentially be bad. Flats or...
And playing tank was a chore. Playing double shield was a chore.
Flats.
Well, I'd argue the culture of Overwatch has actually changed a lot in that time. Like Overwatch 1, it would be seen as weird or throwing if you ever saw your favorite role X streamer playing off role if they weren't on a Smurf account. Like if they were like on their main account and you queued into like low GM or high masters on tank and you're normally a support player, like people like, what the fuck are you doing here? But now it's normal. It's completely normal. Everyone does it now. So it's like, I actually wonder if that would work out better now, because there was a lot of people that didn't want to flex queue because of that stigma. So a lot of the players who did do the flex queue, if they weren't the best at those roles, were typically more hated. But I don't know if that would be the case today.
They also didn't soft reset MMR when they first swapped to role queue, and I was like 4,500 and on ball. And I'm not a 4,500 ball player.
How much does the extrinsic reward affect how the role is being played, regardless of whether it's Hog? Because ultimately, if I'm playing priority pass so I can play DPS more, how seriously am I going to take that game? Right. Whether I'm on Reinhardt or Roadhog.
Yep.
And I think that might shift some of the perspective as well.
Here's an interesting thing.
This is what I wanted to say.
Freedo, go ahead. You want to quickly chime in? I have some Dota points to make, which I always do nowadays.
Yeah, responding to Spilo and Sam here. My experience or memory of the Hog issue for priority passes is the opposite. Not that Hog was good, although he did eventually get Giga buffed to be good. What you would get was DPS players who picked the DPS tank. And that
Yep.
gave us the same problem we had in open queue. Everything we just said about like having a playable team composition, boom, instantly gone. Now you have a tank that can be countered. And the whole like, there wasn't counter picking in Overwatch 1. I think people just were fine with certain tanks being hard countered. Everyone was cool with Roadhog being hard countered, except his teammates who were like, well, they're running a real comp and we're running Roadhog, and Hog sucks right now for whatever reason. So yes, that turned out to be bad, basically. You can't incentivize. There's like a moral hazard to it, essentially. You're incentivizing a DPS player who wants to play that role to go into this tank, and they're going to gravitate towards those less teamwork tanks. Then, of course, and maybe we talk about this more later. I'm not sure where we get into the Overwatch 2 6v6 talk at some point. But from my point of view, a big problem that we're going to quickly see with 6v6 and Overwatch 2 is my big prediction here is that we've now have many Roadhog tanks that are essentially just Roadhog, but in alternate version. One with a shout that runs in with a melee, one that runs really far with a shotgun. Those tanks are likely going to get screwed by any bit of teamwork synergy from the tank line, and you'll have two tanks that potentially could be picked in order to have Giga countered, basically. Whereas maybe the culture changes. Maybe it all gets sorted out in the wash, and we'll just all know that you have to pick certain things. Maybe our community's different. But there was an expectation at the time where if your guy goes Hog, the other guy not only has to pick a defense tank, he gets to hide because there is no synergy going onto that tank, and you sort of just hold the front line and wait and AFK and hope the Hog flanks around and carries the game. And if he doesn't, you lose. That's the entire game. Kind of similar to having like a Doomfist in 5v5 right now. Big boom bust reward gameplay. Very, very similar. And it's tricky because the devs wanted to design tanks to be more fun, because a big criticism of tank gameplay throughout the history of Overwatch 1 was holding a shield isn't so fun. I want to play the shooty guys. So they made a bunch more shooty guys. But the competitive viability and teamwork of the game is so, dare I say the old word, oppressive. It's really oppressive to have multiple damage mitigations completely shutting out all of your Mauga lifesteal or Queen lifesteal. Like, I think that the floor, remember high highs, low lows, the floor of 6v6 potential team comps is really low, because you could get two tanks that synergize versus two tanks that don't. And the community culture and popularity of some of these heroes, I don't know which ones are going to be the ones that stand out like a sore thumb, like Roadhog and Overwatch 1, but I feel like we have a lot more options now, and I look forward to seeing this play out. I think it's going to be great, because the floor of the terrible team comps you could possibly get in Overwatch 2 6v6 is going to be like, you just have two tanks that get countered instead of one. That's what it's going to be. So specialization with skill.
I'll just pause there
I
for a
also
second.
think
I'll just pause there for a second. That's the point. I mean, we're kind of straying, so I'll stick to this for now. I will let Sam the chance to rebuttal, because you've kind of
We
brought
can do
in
it later. Let's go. I don't know if you want to do that, because I think you want to ask these questions.
I want to
We
just
can get
talk
to
about
that.
the priority pass stuff, because we're still
Yeah.
technically on that issue. So Freedo, if you want to chime in on any of that, but otherwise I want to just stick to this point.
yes,
for
priority
now.
pass bad, moral hazard.
Okay.
Not good.
Yes. Right. So, as you guys know, I'm very Dota pilled recently, so I want to float the idea of how Dota does it, just out of interest, because I don't think that necessarily this is good for Overwatch, but I think it's another window into how it could be done, which is that in Dota, firstly, I think, as you very rightly point out, Spilo, the big flaw with the priority pass system is that if you didn't care about your tank SR, let's just be real, it was tank, right? There was no other flexing than tank. If you didn't care about your tank SR, the priority passes were just free. It was like, let me play 5 minutes of a role, I don't give a shit. Toss, if I win, great, I get some extra passes. If I don't win, who cares? I get 2 passes to play DPS. If you don't care, it doesn't matter to you. Now in Dota, firstly, you only have 1 rank for all your roles. So no matter what you're queuing, you're still going to get your 1 rank will be affected. Now the way Dota does it is that you have a pass system, but it's not a priority pass. You need a pass to play. Any role that isn't priority, basically. So there's the desired roles, which basically we don't have enough, which are the 2 support roles in Dota. So hard support and support. They never have enough of those players. So treat them like the tank. So if you want to play those roles anytime, go ahead, it's free. But if you want to play any of the other roles, basically tank, mid, and safe lane, so basically your DPS and your tank, then you have to use a pass to play. And the way you gain passes is by flex queuing, is by saying, I'll play anything, put me on anything. And if you then win, you get yourself like 4 passes. If you lose, you get yourself like 2 passes. So essentially, if we were to put it in Overwatch equivalent, it would mean if you want to play DPS support, you have to expend a pass. And if you want to get a pass, you have to play tank. But the same SR, all of it is under one SR. So should you toss your tank game, you've tossed your own SR overall. Thoughts?
I feel like people would hate that.
I mean, it's balanced. We're revisiting the open queue kind of a thing, right? I mean, it's not the same thing, obviously, but like shared SR definitely solves that issue for sure. But is that something that Overwatch could pull off?
At that point, you should just be an open queue if you're going to try to do that.
Right.
It's a lot.
Right, and it's an idea that would make more sense in Overwatch. It's an idea that makes more sense in Overwatch, in Dota, because the heroes are played more flexibly. So there's definitely not. I'm not, again, like I said, I'm not saying this should add to Overwatch, but it's an idea to think about that. It's how another game approaches. Also, I do think that as someone else alluded to in the call, I think the community of Overwatch is more flexible now than it ever was. And I think Flats, you were mentioning this, that like back then it was like if you were off rolling, you were throwing, whereas now I think because the pros and cons of the counter swap a-thon meta is that people have learned to play a lot more heroes because they kind of feel they need to be rotating amongst many. So we do have a much more flexible community than we ever probably did. But does that mean we could do something like that?
Even the like, I'm not sure. Maybe towards the top level. What about most players in this case? Would you say that's true for like even people in the metal ranks, even people in below metal? I guess bronze. I guess is metal rank. Would you say?
I think the culture has shifted. I think the culture has shifted. I think people, whether they rightly or wrongly, believe that counter swapping is really powerful. So I think, as Spilo alluded to, people in gold are like really they rely on. I mean, I it's hard to say empirically. I don't have any data. I can only go off anecdotal.
People counter swap and quick play after one fight. Like I feel like that should give you a good reference point.
Well, okay, here's the thing. The whole priority pass, I think, is something that maybe they could revisit, but they'd have to, number one, revisit exactly like what tanks we have that are viable. Like the fact that Roadhog is so brain dead and is so easy to shut down in the solo tank or the 2-tank environment is like the problem number one. And then like and also making tanks that are more interesting for a larger percentage. Because if I'm a DPS player priority passing and I'm picking Junker Queen, I might try a little bit because I kind of like playing Junker Queen. So if kind of going to Samito's point a while ago, if we had more tanks that were more interesting for a larger percentage of people, and those tanks also were, not easily countered, then maybe the priority pass could actually fulfill its thing while still keeping people invested in what they're doing. If they're not invested necessarily in the rank, they're invested in playing the character.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
I think again, to speak, because what we're really the philosophical point of what we're speaking to is the role imbalance again, right? It's like fundamentally we have a role imbalance. How do we solve it? And again, I think one favor of the Dota system is that it does encourage everyone to be playing all the roles. Like you need to have some competence on all the roles, which is not a bad thing to do. Like it's pretty good. It helps both the players understanding holistically. Like I do think on a real level, flexing helps you play the heroes you want to play because you understand the other heroes a little bit better. And like, okay, this guy doesn't, if I play Reinhardt, I understand what Reinhardt doesn't like to play, right? But as you guys said, there's so many downsides. Anything has so many downsides. This should be the theme of this discussion as well. Yeah. Every change brings with it some set of pitfalls that some people will just not tolerate. They're like, this is not a game I want to play anymore. Like you've changed it in a way I don't want to play anymore. Any more thoughts on this and the role discrepancy before we start solidifying into more role queue discussions and 6v6 discussion?
I think the role discrepancy is going to come again later on, for sure. We're going to talk.
Just keep moving then.
Okay.
Let's keep this train chugging along.
Okay then. So they talk about the fact that they added priority passes, they added loot boxes, they added XP. None of it worked. As Freedo said, damage queues drifted a bit lower over time, but much of this was due to the introduction of open queue competitive. So basically, the damage players who didn't want to wait too long, they're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go open queue where I can play 5 DPS. Great. Freedo, anything you want to quickly add? I see you smiling there.
Yeah, I just spilled water on my shirt, so that's nice. All. That's all I have to add. I must have loved the point you just made so much. It distracted me.
So excited.
Absolutely. And then Aaron says there were additional drawbacks to role queue. It came at the cost of player freedom. Team compositions were now locked, and games started to feel very samey. And then this is where again he says that maybe there's some soft hybrid system we can make. So any more thoughts on this? On maybe you want to? Does anyone want to talk about like the game feeling samey? Is that a complaint we could make a 5v5 now as well?
It
Sam?
feels way more samey now than it did before.
Agreed.
It
100%.
definitely it definitely was a little bit more samey in roll queue for 6v6 in both formats. It's a little bit more samey, but when it went to one tank, it became way more samey because the amount of options on the map and the playmaking potential are reduced. You gained access for space, but you lost actual viable gameplay options to create opportunity. Some of that's because of things like passives, but a lot of it's from the format.
And that's where me and Sam are just like, we're this permanent struggle. There's some like Greek mythology here going on here, space versus target choice, which one's, but yeah, I mean, my only challenge, well, it just basically, it's one of the things of the 66 and 5v5 where it's like with 5v5, you have more space to shoot more targets and engage in more things. But then Sam's argument is that you're going from 6 viable targets to essentially from a lot of DPS and supports to 4 viable targets, because not only do you subtract a tank, but oftentimes your matchup versus that tank is a lot worse because your percentage damage just isn't worth anything to the larger health pool. And it's like, I'm the space guy, so I'm like, yeah, but I value the space. Like you can choose to engage, and Sam's like, yeah, but you're removing you can't actually trade with tanks at all anymore. So I don't know. I think it's it's a nuanced topic. I appreciate that Sam elaborates on what he's saying feels quote unquote samey, because whenever I read statements like that, I always get ticked off, not from Aaron, but from other people, because I'm like, okay, what do you mean samey? What feels samey in Overwatch 2 right now? And people, you need to elaborate. I think if you make a claim like that, elaborate. What do you mean samey?
And so
don't disagree. Just
yeah. I was gonna say. So do you agree or disagree with the premise of like it is samey?
I don't know, man. I don't know. In my limited perspective from working at Overwatch League and then just playing ranked every now and then, like I don't play the game near as much as these guys. I would not necessarily agree, although we have had metas that feel very samey. But that's just my perspective, and it's just not objective at all. So
okay, I mean,
question. I got a question. So, would you not say that it's objective if the tank you run into now is a roadblock in every 1v1? Like it's almost impossible to win against that roadblock. And in 6v6, sometimes the synergies, I could understand why people would say they are roadblocks.
I'm gonna get you. I know what you're saying. I'm not gonna hold you. I'm not gonna bad.
I've been watching how do I say his name? Ralph, is that how I say his name?
Ralph. Yeah.
I watched a 2-hour Ralph VOD last night. Critiquing us. He was cooking us a little bit.
I didn't see the video.
It's really funny. He was you bring up psychology and he just starts screaming. He's like, he was waiting for this. It was really funny. But we'll probably get into more of the nitty gritty in a bit. I won't push it. I was just curious.
Yeah, okay. My only thing is not even challenging the people here, but to people everywhere else. When you say samey, what do you mean? Sam says it's target choice, which is a great point, but beyond that, you have to elaborate. What do you mean the game feels samey?
Okay, Freedo, anything you want to add on this point? I mean, this isn't even necessarily actually talking about 6v6. He's talking about roll queue, open queue to roll queue. But yeah, the idea of the game feeling samey, I think, is one that is transferable. And again, that kind of the theme of, well, as we lost flexibility and creativity, the game started to sand down a little bit. That's what happened open queue, roll queue. Was that fine? And was it fine when it happened 6v6 to 5v5, the sameness, quote unquote, of the game?
Yeah, I mean, you have to say yes, without a doubt, because the reliability of the experience was the goal. So to make it more reliable, it has to be less variable. These are mutually exclusive ideas. But the question is, are the extreme high highs of that worth the more extreme low lows, as I've said before? So the variability of how reliable your game experience goes way up or down based on your teammates' choices. The more complexity is added, in my opinion. And there's a big gap here, I think, between the high-level opinion on these things and the average player's opinion on these things, and what they'll, I hope, quickly realize when they get back to playing this in several seasons when it comes out, is the better you are and the more you understand about the game, the more you'll appreciate that in-depth nuance of, well, we've got, I don't want to keep going back to open queues. It's so easily like, okay, 6 DPS. How do you play that? Like I don't think we're really doing that. But even with the 6v6 roll lock version, there's more variance because where the tanks could position, like one of the lost identities was Wrecking Ball, a character I loved in Overwatch 1, where now tanks kind of the more optimal play often is, as Hawk says correctly, is like anchoring in the front, just hiding away, trying to play efficiently. Spilo made an amazing video breaking down Hawk's Ramatra that made me salivate to watch. That is true at the high level, but I think at unoptimized levels, so everywhere that isn't in the top 1%, it starts to devolve into like Samey in the other direction. So to me, it was more Samey in the previous versions in Overwatch 1 because it was a lot of everyone only knowing how to play the Reinhardt comp, and you either had it or you did it. Either you had the Reinhardt comp and you walked to the choke and brawled at the choke, or maybe didn't get out of King's Row A choke because of how easy chokes were to hold in 6v6 Overwatch 1. Or you played that way anyway and didn't have the pick, and that was also bad. So that was more samey. But then as you get higher up in the mastery, Sam's takes on this are really good in terms of just the selection, the durability of certain things. It's super obvious when you look at high level ranked gameplay in Overwatch 2 of how samey it is and why they hate it. I totally get why they hate it. But when there is mistakes being made, I think it's more fluid and there's more variety in what picks you could specialize in, which is a huge aspect of these two games and these two directions. I think that really matters. Like to me, anyway, is when I say balance, for example, I care about hero diversity, and I think we've kind of lost that. And instead, the term balance for a lot of people just means the palatability of the meta. And maybe you're okay if Roadhog's in the dumpster, right? You're just like, well, don't balance him up, like leave him down in the grave where he belongs. And all these things are subjective at the end of the day.
Flats, anything you want to chime in on this point? No?
Nope.
You good? Okay. Sam, anything you want to add before we move on to other things?
Probably move on to other things, but to briefly summarize, I agree that things definitely became more samey in role queue. I think it went too far to samey in 5v5 role queue specifically, but we'll get to that when we start talking more about stuff later on in the blog.
Okay, now we get to as the subtitles of Aaron's blog. So we say the third major format change, and then why we switched to 5v5. So I think this is probably where the debate will probably begin. This is where we'll have to discuss Aaron's premises, and I will see if you guys all agree with the picture he's painted or not, and then the reasons he's given for why he's tried to change away from that, or the team. I shouldn't say he, because it's not a singular effort, but why the team has moved away from it. So let's start with Overwatch is a team sport and it requires players to rely on each other to be successful. This was even more the case previously and could be frustrating if your team was out of sync. Many times, fights in 6v6 couldn't resolve until ultimate abilities came online. Correct that. Ultimate combos could be executed to break through 2 tanks worth of mitigation supported by high, uncontested healing output. The world of 6v6 could have really high highs but really low lows. And this was what 5v5 was trying to kind of solidify. So let me go
real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Flats.
Is that above or below the queue time graph? Have we got past it already?
We haven't. No, don't worry. I'll spend a good time talking about the queue time graph. That's still a section away.
Cool. Sorry, I was just curious. My bad.
No worries. No, don't worry. I'm definitely not skipping that. That's a very interesting piece of info. So yeah, let's talk about this. Like, I'll go to Spilo first. We'll go to neutrals first here, and then we'll go to Salmon and Freedo. Flats, Spilo, do you agree with this? That, well, firstly, it required more team coordination and it meant more games ground to a halt, and ultimate combos were needed to kind of break this stalemate.
Required more team coordination, maybe, but I will say that like 5v5 was definitely like a sledgehammer solution, because I think like this is going to be where my neutral stance is that yes, I do think that at the state of time for years, Overwatch had been a situation where it was really hard to secure kills outside of ultimate combos. That I think was pretty clearly true. Constant pressure from like an off angle from anything that didn't have a one shot just was really not often good enough in Overwatch 1. But that's not broadly applicable to Overwatch 1. And that's where I think a lot of the frustration from Sam comes in to play, because like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about Orisa Sigma? Are we talking about Ryan Zari? Are we talking about Ana Lucio or Zen Lucio? Are we talking about Bat Brick, right? And I think like that's the key thing is, and that's what I would wish I would have seen more addressed stuff, that like a lot of the hero designs exacerbated the weak points of 66, because the weak point of 66 is that it has the propensity or the potential for being sustain stack, but that doesn't mean that that has to always be that way, right? And so I think that I agree that the ultimate combos might have been more necessary than Overwatch 1 than Overwatch 2. I think that's objectively true, even with some of the problems of Overwatch 2. But it didn't have to be that way. And so I see that as a downside, but that doesn't mean that it required a move to 5v5.
That's fair.
Because we're also pointing a point in time, like, sorry, really quick, it's the poison the well argument that so many of our arguments about open queue and priority passing, it was just, we were at a really dark time in terms of hero design and game design at that point in time. We have Orisa, we have Sigma, we have BAP, we have Brig, we have Gigabuff Mei, we have Gigabuff Reaper, we have Gigabuff Hanzo, Tracer's not viable, Lucio's not as viable, Ana's not viable, Winston's not as viable, Reinhardt's dead. Like, this is at a point in time where Overwatch, like hero design and game design and meta was just really crappy for a long time.
Sam, you got your hands up. Go ahead.
They introduced brick walls into the mid fight where a ton of times in 6v6 you would get an entry kill and you'd make all the right plays. Oh, immortality field, reverse card, stall out. You know, so all the times, and like there's a huge difference. You can feel it in 6v6. And some of these brick walls are in 5v5 too, where, you know, Flats, I remember you reacting to the super clip on Winston on Numbani, where he's like primaling the back.
Comments are so funny on that.
Yeah, where they're like skill issue. You're telling super skill issue. What are you talking about, right? So, to be fair, these are design issues that can happen in both formats. In 6v6, when there was, to be fair, there only was one immortality at the time in 6v6, but like again, Bap and Brig were strong the entirety of roll queue. There was only one time in the entirety of roll queue where Bap and Brig were considered weak picks. Anyone care to guess when that was? Or do I have to bring up the Messiah again of October 2020?
Bingo, man.
Like, you know, that was the only time those characters, maybe Brig Zen too, but, you know, when the game wasn't played around those characters, even Lucio Moira, I know we do complain about Moira sometimes. I think she got power crept a little bit too much in this game too, but, you know, at least the Moira metas don't have those brick walls you run into where, and this hurt, I've said this forever, that hurt the tank players the most, because who gets punished? Who forced the MOs the most? Like, the MOs would most often be used when the tank dance was happening, right? When a tank would mess up and somebody should die, oh, immortality field. And so, of course, when you introduce a brick wall that counters everything on a cooldown, not an ultimate, you're going to see the game definitely go towards ult usage more, which, by the way, a lot of my games, and this is more of a high-level play thing here, to be fair, right now, like, on Esperanza, the first fight, always, every single time when it's in a mid GM lobby, it's just waiting for an ult dump, and we just sit there and do it. So it still happens
map
now.
Issue.
And listen, I love Esperanza. I don't want to talk bad about Esperanza. I love
a good
that
map. It's just the first fight.
I know. We got to go on the Clone Man Paris flank. I know you like that VOD, Spilo. I know you like that VOD. Works every time. But so to be fair to both 5v5 and 6v6, like if you see a lot of fights go towards ults, it's because the abilities are so strong that a lot of the times it results in a stalemate until an ult, something that's powerful enough to break through it, can be used. So it's hard to point at one part of 6v6 or 5v5 when a lot of that is design. Though I would argue when it's not Bat, Brig, Orisa, Sigma in 6v6, there are more cases for immortality and duels going on in the map for an immortality ability to get forced, creating more opportunity for a mid-fight picked to happen. But that being said as well, in 6v6, this is where I could give 5v5 a point. Fights are more turnable. So like if you got one kill, like in 5v5, a lot of time that's going to end the fight. Not every time, but a lot more of the time. So it's a deeper conversation than it's not as simple as 5v5 or 6v6 roll lock. It's a lot of hero design goes into it too.
Mm-hmm. Freedo, I'll take it to you next. How do you feel about this sort of statement Aaron made about the game grinding to a halt and needing ults to kind of break that stalemate?
Yes, I think it's important to highlight that from the average tier, that balance and a lot of these designs, some of the designs, yes, but balance doesn't really affect this so much because a lot of these things, the casual player didn't know how to use properly. Like a character like Bap, for example, way better when your team plays around cover because everything he does gets better when they're in better position or stacking on the tank because the AoE healing will do more, Lamp will do more, etc. So it's not to say he wasn't obnoxious, but I would never say that he caused poke at the choke meta, which is a thing that on our channel we try to teach people how to escape, right? Like escaping a choke was horrific before a lot of these characters were added. And as much of a problem that Brig undoubtedly was, not a problem for the casual player, because the spacing knowledge and the gameplay of it, either again, AoE healing gets a skill curve advantage the better your team synergizes, which the whole GOATS era, for example, is like the best example of this. It wasn't immediately obvious that GOATS would be the most optimal comp. It took time and patches, of course, and that changed it as well. It buffed Lucio sound barrier. Lots of other things happened as well. But when Brig was introduced, it was originally like a triple support with a Mercy in the Overwatch League, as an example. That was deemed useful, but the casual player didn't know how to use either her or play around and exploit that. And really, it comes through the, watch Samito play the game for a long time. His spacing rotations is something I still try to emulate to this day. Just being able to, maximize the greed in the front and then pull back. And a lot of this you probably learned from playing Brig in contenders. So not a skill set that I think the average player had, yet the poke at the choke meta was still prevalent because of just how easy it is to jam up some brawler tanks into a choke. I think I'm really looking forward to doing this test on the new maps, though, and the other improvements to Overwatch 2. I think that's like the biggest upside that 6v6 could have, is that they've learned a lot of things. In the transition from 1 to 2, they tried to do like 10 things at once to improve this problem, right? They changed the map design. They try to make everything more self-sufficient. We have the self-heal passive. There's lots and lots of things, not just removing a tank. And I think the biggest gap of my opinion on this is that for a casual player, you could always get around a tank. As the game gets higher and higher, and in 5v5, everyone's playing better positions, you kind of just have to look at the tank because no one's going to be out of position enough. Whereas for most other players, I think at 5v5, there is openings to play fluidly and have different hero choices and whatnot.
Very fair point. I think bringing up the maps is a very fair point. Just because I think the loss of 2CP in of itself is a huge buff to this not happening, the grinding the game to a halt. I think most traumatic memories come from being stuck on Hanamura Point B, trying to get through that staircase. Yeah. Volskaya, just getting like these are
2CP was the big egregious
example.
Hybrid a close second though.
Hybrid is a close second. Hybrid is a close second. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas
some
actually
of those control chokes.
Yeah, absolutely. Which was, if you look at Runesapi, for example, this is a map with more routes than I think ever an Overwatch map has had. Like everywhere connects to somewhere else. And so I think it's very hard for the game to grind to a halt when a player has access to so many different routes. So I do think it is. And again, I understand that Aaron has to simplify for the blog. He can't caveat everything. He can't add nuance to everything. But this is something that maybe isn't universally true in the switch from 6.6 to 5.5. Sam, you got something to say before I take it to flat?
I also do want to point out my thoughts out there that I don't think that 2 tanks stacking on a choke was unbreakable at all. It was breakable in many different ways because they were killable. There were many different opportunities to actually kill those 2 tanks, in which case the only way they could become oppressive is if they actually executed. And in an FPS game, and in this game should be about execution, right? And you don't have to be a high-ranked player to actually appreciate the ability to execute to get some value, where now every tank at every level, if that's the choke they decide to stand on, because there are times where it happens pretty consistently, actually, when you have to fight on the objective, there's just no matter how you execute, there's no option there to get them. It just won't happen.
Okay, Freedo and Spilo, think on that point that Sam has just made while I take it to Flats. Flats, anything on that point or anything else you want to mention about the 6v6 grinding to a halt?
Which point specifically? Because I feel like we just went through like 10. Is it the ults?
I mean, go off on anything. Like the original point obviously was about Aaron saying, hey, well, you needed ults to break through. But Sam saying, actually, I do think that 2 tanks and a choke was breakable, even without, like the improved map design, etc.
It was game mode specific, and I think the big one was 2CP, and 2CP was one of the 4 game modes, and so people are going to remember those moments more than anything, because like Overwatch is all about your buttons, right? Like, and if you were good with your buttons, you could cap both points in 2CP with 3 minutes and 30 seconds left, because you use your ult rotation properly on first and use your ult rotation properly on second, you'd get plenty of time. But if you really sucked, you had to wait till overtime, then overtime spawns, and you cap with overtime. That was ass, but like Overwatch has always been like that. It's always been about your ults, and ults has always been a big problem for Overwatch, but it's also been part of the allure of Overwatch. So it's a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to balance. That being said, though, people are always going to remember the moment where you're playing against double shield and you have ball hog and they can't walk through, but also not remember those games where, or sorry, they'll glorify those games where they had two Ryan Zarya's going at each other. So some games are going to be great and some games are going to be ass. I think 2CP was the big one that would always remember, like, if your ults weren't perfect, you'd be fucked. And that was probably the biggest frustration game mode, and because it's not around anymore, that'll probably help a lot.
Okay, Spilo, take it to you, and then back to Freedo about the point that Sam made. No, you got nothing?
I don't really have much to add. Yeah, I think it's hard to say. It's hard to say.
You're taking a little zen moment. You're like, let me regather my patience here.
I was thinking about Sam's point there where the tanks are killable, and I just don't know. I think there's some discussions, like even the whole like the options thing that Sam and I are like debating about, like whether more space or whether like actual kill pressure and tank matters more. I feel like my own understanding and like of the game has changed since then. So it's like I just don't even think I can really like stand firm in any opinion. You know, I think it just has to be tested at this point. I'm really not sure.
I relate to that a lot. I think maybe Flats does as well. Like where we're like I can't say vividly enough that I remember with such detail and then be able to speculate off such detail onto the new things that have been added that I would be able to empirically say this is how it would go. I just don't remember. I must have been napping a lot. I do like to nap.
Yeah.
Frida.
Yeah, I'll plug for Sam's 6v6 code because you know in the meantime you could.
True.
I mean it is a community pub, so it's not quite the same, but you know you could get a little bit of a taste.
Exactly. That is where, you know, we need the tests. We kind of, at this point, we need some tangible testing, either via Sam's pug code or the developers doing their own.
To be clear, not my code, actually. To be fair, shout out to Toasty and their developers. They've done. I've had no say in it. They did it all on their own. It was good for them.
Sorry, who was that again? Just to get the credit.
Toasty and Selleck.
Okay, cool, awesome. So shout out.
I believe
to them.
I might have gotten that wrong. Yeah.
Freedo, back to you.
Yeah, I'll try to do this quickly, but tanks were breakable. I think Sam has a unique perspective on this by being such a great player, and I don't know if average players felt that or had the skill set to hit all their echo stickies in one burst and burst to Zarya, and it looks awesome when I watch him do it. But I think what Aaron's describing is accurate, the way the natural state of the game happened for the average player, regardless of what heroes got added, what the balance was, blah, 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 because oftentimes they wouldn't play the meta things anyway, or even know how to abuse them, but it just sort of generally went like that. And I think a big percentage of it is also their understanding. Like, we might be better at off-angling now, having played Overwatch 2, because in the same way that we look to some of those, the glory patch of October, I think a big percentage of that was the community learning how to adapt to the Gigahog patch, let's say, or all these other patches that we had in a row. And the community trained up on those skill sets and their positioning on those worked. So even if something was a little less viable, it felt like you could do it because everyone in the lobby knew how to adjust to that. And that's a big thing. Sam wants to reply.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief here. I can't let it only come back to because it's me, because it's a high-level player. One of the most complained about heroes in the metal ranks in Overwatch 1 was Reaper, because he would be able to walk into tanks and destroy them in the metal ranks. And this is one of the more complained about heroes alongside Moira. So, yeah, like in a way that I definitely do have more knowledge about how to, you know, create an opportunity on tank, because, like, you know, I played the game forever, but, you know, you don't have to be a high-ranked player to understand how much easier it is for a Reaper or a cast to 3-shot a 400 HP Zarya in the head. Like, you know, that. Now, granted, would you always get those opportunities? Not necessarily, because, again, there was you had to have some kind of, you know, dance on the front line to make that happen. But, you know, they did happen consistently. And on top of that, in order for those tanks to become oppressive, for it to be a stalemate, they had to actually play and execute together. Now, and this is why I think 5v5 is worse, that execution isn't a requirement whatsoever. It's all passively on the characters. And not only is it passively on the characters, but this is what I also kind of want to ask a bit of a question, not to you, Freedo, but who is Aaron talking about here about the game slowing to a crawl? Because when there was a tank exchange that mattered, the tank frontline presence, that was a little bit faster in my opinion. And it had way more depth and dynamic to it too. So as a tank player, and again, if you guys want to feel this, like, is the game perfect? No, Freedo, I think you are right when you say, hey, counter swapping is not just gone in 6v6. It's definitely not. It's still there. It's just less on the hero pick and more about how you play. And I've always said that's what makes Overwatch special, and that's why people come on to play this game. And if anybody doubts that, go play their 6v6 code. The test is up right now, and you can feel it. It's super, super noticeable. And I don't think 5v5 had to go in the really insane power creep direction that it has. But we are here, and the devs explicitly said that it achieved their goal. And if this is the outcome where there's just no execution there, and a lot of people complained a ton about Orisa in this game when she was good in the low ranks. I don't even think there were some patches where she was meta. I think they did like slightly power creep her over time, or I would say make her more viable. I think like Terra Surge going through Shield is probably a good change. Like, it was really bad before that, but I don't think it's fair to say at least that just because like I'm a high level player or Hawk's a high level player, Jake brought that up a ton in our debate, that it's only unique to them. Like, no, like average players like can understand when they're shooting a unkillable target and a target that can actually die. And a lot of the hero picks that dominated low level play for most of Overwatch 1's lifetime were heroes like Reaper, who were complained about continuously. So I don't think it's fair to say that in its entirety, but there are some points where the tanks are executing well that I can understand why that'd be frustrating. I just think it's better that when I'm playing the game, I'm playing an FPS game, that players actually have to execute to get some form of value. And those windows of vulnerability were certainly there regardless. And I encourage everybody to just go play the 6v6 code, because some good things can come from both.
Quickly,
I
Spilo,
didn't quite get to finish it or respond to
ahead.
the thing, so
Yeah, go ahead.
You
You
can
go-
go to
you
Spilo
go
if you
ahead.
want,
Yeah, go ahead.
but
No. Go ahead, Freedo. Go ahead.
here's some simple questions, right? Because I feel like you state these things definitively, like they're objective when it's your subjective opinion, and then also there's always, as you say, winners and losers in this. I don't know that tank players loved the concept of a Reaper easily killing them. While that's true, it also made tanking harder and required more teamwork. So a lot of the things you're saying are true, but they're not objectively a net benefit to everyone always. And I also don't agree that tanking in 5v5 is entirely free. Like, if the Diva or Ram or whoever, these Giga tanks, mismanage their defenses, are they not dying? And then why would everyone complain about tank if they are or aren't? Like, I'm losing the plot of my own sentence here, but like I feel like we complain on both ends of it. We say like, well, the tank experience sucks, but they're unkillable. It's like, wait, hold on a second, which one is it? Like, we got to pick one.
I don't think we have to pick one. Go ahead. Sorry, you finish.
The poke at the choke meta is the way the average player experienced the game. It isn't like what it should be, but that's what it devolves into, because that's the natural state of things. And if you want the type of game where neither team feels like they can advance on each other and they have to wait until ultimates, grab dragon, for example, was like the one way that a metal rank player could break out of a choke. That gameplay sucked. It was really bad. And it's easy to forget about this until I went through my catalog of videos looking through. And I think a lot of this is because I spent a higher percentage of time than a lot of other analysts and content creators in VODs of players, VOD reviewing their experience and trying to teach them how to overcome it. And I think a reality of this game that we have to realize is a lot of players are only going to get marginally better for their entire career. We have this idea that it should be defined by the top level gameplay, but most people will never get there. And so the game has to be fun and playable for everybody, not just in its optimized version. And while all of the tank complexity is amazing for higher tiers, I also think does actually dominate a big percentage of the gameplay. If you look to a comp like, Winston Zarya Double Bubble was really fun. Love that comp. Really good. But it sets the tempo of every single engage, jamming in the choke, cycling the resources, and that becomes a big focal point of the entire game experience of everybody and the spectator experience. And I have more intimate awareness of watching that level of gameplay. But I can't say I would just like trade that instantly. It's automatically a big upgrade. I don't know if I agree necessarily. And I think as much as esports has kind of died in Overwatch 2, unfortunately, a lot of it is better because of these changes. So I responded to a bunch of stuff there. A lot of this stuff, it's gonna be exciting to see this tested. Okay, like we could theory all day long and say this is what's gonna happen, but like really they just gotta put it in the game. So because I don't even think people will agree with me to any degree that I'm right until they're stuck at that choke again. They're like, oh wait, actually like 2 shields, and it's not just Orisa Sig. It's like now we've got and they got to rebalance it and everything, but like Ram's gonna have a shield and Ryan's gonna have a shield, and like I don't know what's gonna happen necessarily, but I'm not sure. Having experience in Overwatch 1, players don't really want to learn tank synergy, but yet it dominated, and I think it will again.
Okay. So a couple points here.
Wait,
SB,
wait,
can I
wait, wait,
rebut it?
wait. This Spilo, you wanted to say something earlier.
Because it's relevant super fast. So like going back to the ultimate combinations, I think the reason why ultimate combinations felt so important and so powerful was just because of the lack of space. Like old combos are worse in Overwatch 2. Why? Because people spread out more. Why do people spread out more? Because map design is improved. There's too fewer people in the battlefield, so off angling and things like that matters a lot more. So the tricky thing that we have here with maybe with 6v6 is not really the two tanking thing, but how much have we learned about map design? And also, this is a bit of a spicy take that I don't think I've heard talked about before, but the projectile DPS category was a big problem in 6v6 because Junkrat, Pharah, Mei,
Doomfist.
Torbjorn, even Hanzo and Doomfist were choke obliterators. And with less space, those characters were absolutely awful to play versus. Terrible as a casual player. So again, we got to go back to being like, maybe even with one tank or two tanks, or like it's not even, it's like we talk a lot about like, it's tanks problems that chokes were bad. Maybe it wasn't just tanks problems. Maybe it was also the projectile DPS category. Maybe it was mostly, so like, maybe it was just mostly map design. Like Freedo says, we really just have to go test these things. Because even if we were to go to 2 shields or no shields or 1 shield, whatever, like a lot of characters abuse chokes harder than we have now. Like what I like is I don't like the fewer options maybe of target priority like Sam says, but I do like the space that Overwatch 2 provides. And so if we do go back to 6v6 again and try 6v6 again, I want to feel space. I want that space. I don't want that to go away. That's my biggest personal goal, I guess I would say.
Sam.
So a couple points I want to really break down and kind of explain because it's hard. We haven't really had a chance to sit down and like articulate this. So, Freedo, you said that. Which one is it? Do tank players have it? Like, why are tank players unhappy, but also DPS players complaining that the tanks aren't killable and there's options, right? Which one is it? You have to pick. You don't actually have to pick. And here's why it's worse for both people. What makes tank unfun now in 5v5 is the dance has been removed. Right? When there's 2 tanks that are lower health, and I've been playing the 6v6 code, it doesn't really matter what matchup you're on. When both tanks are much lower health with their resources, there is way more opportunity and decision-making to create an advantage. That was removed in 5v5. And the more they've buffed stats, the more tank is about sustaining in the proper place until somebody else makes a mistake or wins a duel on the side. Not to mention, and this isn't talked about a lot, when you're playing the tank, especially in a lot of these maps that can be very, very linear, when you and your counterpart both have the ult mitigation passive and you're shooting each other, right, you're not going to get your ult first. So you can't even be more efficient than the rest of the roster so that you can actually build your ult and then go make a play. Especially with all the supports also guaranteed having their immortalities or big burst abilities that have all been gigabuffed even more. Even if you make the correct decision in the tank mirror that should get you a kill, you're not going to get it because it's so much easier for the 2 support players to recognize that their tank is going to die and more resources get dumped into them. So your dance has been removed in order to make you feel better as the solo tank. The stats have been increased so much so that even when you as the player make the correct decisions to make a play on your counterpart, that opportunity and that reward won't actually be given to you because there's so much statistic there that will bail you out no matter what. So that's why the tank players feel worse because, again, their dance and their agency to create that opportunity is so much more difficult in this game, especially with the DPS passive being the only way for things to really die. If you don't have a DPS shooting that tank, they will not die. And if you're not all ganging up on the raid boss, that kill cannot be created and that advantage cannot be there. While in 6v6, it's way easier to get that entry kill because those stats are all lower. And when a mistake is made, there's a human error element to it, to where if the other player doesn't cover for that mistake instantaneously and recognize it, that player ends up dying. So the take dance was removed. But what DPS players lose too is that because the stats have been buffed up so much, even if that diva flies in behind my backline and I full sticky her, shooter, echo beam, she won't die. I can't kill her. So I lose as a DPS player when that player makes the wrong decision, and the tank player actually cannot pierce through the stats, which is why you see a lot more counter swapping now too, because being on the correct matchup to pierce through insanely strong abilities. Like Spilo, we talked about this when Diva gets that 3.5 second DM. Like Zarya still doesn't help her in the matchup against Zarya, but it might help her against chasing down poke damage, whatever it may be. It doesn't actually help in that matchup. So the tank dance was removed. The stats are buffed so the DPS players can't actually create and get that kill. So that's how both players lose in that environment. And that's why both roles lose. And I saw a video actually recently came out. from a guy I know from Mindplex called Ezrin. And he was playing mostly tank and 6v6. And he said, the first, and I hope you guys watch it. It's actually a really interesting and nuanced tank where he's like, yeah, playing tank was harder. Like I died a couple times, like actually trying to play tank, but then I realized I was dying for my mistakes and my decision making, and the game felt in his control and way less on autopilot, which is what we see a lot of people kind of talking about now. Is it 100% autopilot? No, but it's way less thoughtful, and there's no direct feedback for the decisions that you make. And in an FPS game, how you play and what you do, regardless of skill level, is what should determine what you get reward for. And that's what makes it fun for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be everybody, but that's what a lot of people have been missing out. And I feel like I could have done a better job of like trying to articulate that over time and make sure that, I was actually, because I get a lot of these conversations go on for a long time and it's hard to
You
like
need to
kind of
stop
nail
having
that
these
point.
conversations over Twitter. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's Twitter. Yeah, it's too hard.
Y'all put it on a platform and then you got something to lose, right? Because everyone's cheering for either side, and so everyone gets super defensive. You guys are way too smart for that.
We should have done MP4s. I'm a video format guy. This is why I'm always going to be back in video format. But I'm not sure if that makes sense or you get what I'm trying to say with that. Because like again, just to briefly summarize, as a DPS player, going up against a tank with gigastats that I cannot ever beat in a 1v1 isn't as fun for me because I can't make a play on them. And for the tank players, that song and dance of how to create value, where it was in their playmaking and working together and being more efficient than the other tank frontline, that was removed from the game as well. So that's how both players lose. I don't think it's a mutually exclusive thing.
Am I allowed to respond? How long are we going to go at this? I mean,
Yeah,
one more set, and then we're gonna move on.
I don't know why we have the expectation that one DPS player should nuke a tank in 5v5. I think that's a little silly. You should be trying to team shoot it, pulling resources out. Well, you're setting it as if that's the template for what good balance should look like. Should you be able to kill a tank, yes or no? And we'll see this when it comes out as a test. Will tank players like getting one hit? It's very easy to cherry pick the examples of people going back to it now and realizing, oh yeah, it does take more skill. I mean, there's a lot of statements you made that I would never contest with. Is there a tank dance in 6v6 that creates an advantage? Yeah, I'd agree with that. The depth of the high level is certainly deeper. That we're always going to agree on that. But the question is, do most people experience that?
You don't have to have high level though. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's not just a high level thing.
Is Aaron lying, Sam?
Is
Aaron lying when he? Because Aaron, I mean, listen, you go through this, listen to the videos I've made on this subject, and read Aaron's blog. Is there anything Aaron said in that contradicted any point I've ever made? I don't think there is one. In fact, I think he's confirmed things I've said about Q times being better, about the poke at the choke meta, and a bunch of things I didn't even know, didn't even think about in order to justify the direction they've went. If the entry kill is easier,
have you referenced I want to be Tracer though in a video?
I should have, obviously, because that would would have improved it immensely. If the entry kill is easier, why did we have a poke at the choke meta for the average player? Can't both be true. It's easier for you, Sam, or for the player that wants to cheese the game and play Reaper to burst a Zarya. Reaper's not that popular of a hero like overall and is super oppressive. So I don't think it's just like we're going to flip the switch and people are going to be happy. That's always been my argument, that it isn't that there isn't merit to 6v6. Of course there is. It's a game I loved and covered for 6 years with great depth. It's just that you're not going to get the things you want. And I think we should be really careful in telling players they're going to have a certain experience, and then when it comes and they're getting bursted by an echo and like, oh God, this is so fun, I'm out of position and I die instantly. No, this is the reason why people don't want to play tank in Overwatch 1. Like, why don't we draw that line that it's so punishing and difficult and requires a skill set that they didn't want to learn? That's why we have all of the easy and forgiving tank stats in Overwatch 2. That's why it's there. I'm not saying one's better than the other necessarily. There's just trade-offs.
Spilo.
Can I be neutral really quick? Neutral. So the one thing that I think is objectively true with tank, when there are two tanks, you are squishier by design, as Sam was saying. You can trade. But it's compensated by the fact that now there are two tanks to look at. So you don't have to, you might be a squishier tank, but you don't have everybody's attention. And that's it. That's the
main tank.
Yeah, yes, but then you have the support of your off tank either directly through a bubble or a Zarya, or indirectly with a Roadhog flanking, and either they're not looking at the Roadhog and he kills your backline, or they're looking at the Roadhog and that's resource. Like, that's all a tank is. It's just something to pull attention, and when there's two tanks, you're splitting the resources. So yes, you might die to Sticky's beam. I understand that. I agree that's an issue. But in theory, the 66 argument is that attention doesn't all go onto you. It is split. And I do think that even if you weren't running an optimal tank synergy, that was still the experience. So again, like that to me is where the argument boils down to. Would you rather have more options to deal with that attention, or would you rather have help with that attention?
Sam, really quick, Sam.
Yeah. To answer your question about Aaron, yeah, I do think he's wrong. I think that he was completely wrong about that section of the dev blog. And I watched a lot of Plat players play the 6v6 code. And again, like it was not a stalemate. Like every duel, like things died more. And it doesn't matter what rank you're in for that to happen. I think that was the one part of the blog where they were completely off the money saying that it was more of a stalemate. So I do think he's wrong. I'm not saying that you're wrong on this. I'm not saying that the content that you made covering the game all those years ago was wrong. I think a lot of the stuff that you made for the metal rank players probably helped them a lot, considering their metal ranks and they don't really know what to do. But the difference is like, they actually had the choice and the ability to not only improve, but explore these options. And it's not just on Reaper. It's not just on a lot of those heroes. You go ahead, SB. I won't.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say, okay, so point made, you're saying you do disagree with Aaron. I think that's a fair place to put this opinion, this section of it. Well, I think we got some good ideas on both sides. Flats, do you want to chime in on anything that's been said so far? I know you've been quiet for a little bit of time, and I appreciate both, well, me, Flats, and Spilo, we're going to be maybe in this section taking a little bit of backseat, so I appreciate you guys. Flats.
Not really. There's so much. It's don't even know where to jump in at this point.
Okay, cool. I mean, I'm enjoying it. I hope you're still enjoying the sort of exchange. And if you do want to chime in at any point, just go ahead. Just jump in because especially these guys, I know they're gonna know a lot to say. So if you're ever like, actually, I do want to interject on.
But it's not like we're trying to understand each other. We're just kind of like trying to nitpick arguments. I feel like at this point, like it's kind of for the birds for me.
Okay, so you feel like we're kind of getting too much into the nitty gritty.
Just more like, I don't know. It's all perspective at the end of the day. Like, you know what I mean? Like, some of us are going to have a high level perspective. Some of us are going to have more of a metal rank perspective, and that's totally fine. But it's like, neither of these formats are perfect. Like, they're literally not. And I how deep we're fucking digging our claws into each one when we both know there's massive problems on both ends is just kind of absurd to me.
Hero pants.
Yeah. They would help. They would help.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really relevant point, the flat spill. That's certainly been my feeling watching a lot of the format debates, is that I totally understand why you guys are so passionate and why you guys do feel. And I think it's valid. I think it's necessary. I think this encapsulates in a call why we need different perspectives. We need people like Sam to push the envelope and be like, hey, what about this format? I really want you to think about this format. We need people like Freedo to be like, wait a minute, you're forgetting what that was like. I'm not sure you want to go down that path.
I think we can do that respectfully. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, I think we can just, you know what I mean? We can say our piece and it's like, no, you're not wrong. Like, it's like, at least the way I feel personally is like, we've all stepped on the gas a little too fucking hard at this point. That's at least for me. You know, and I feel like I used to be the guy that was stepping on the gas a little hard. You know what I mean? It's like, whoa.
So do you want to elaborate? You just kind of feel like maybe this...
They both have massive problems. You know what I mean? So it's like, there is no end all at the end of the day. And like, you know, it's like we're playing for points. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, like, I think everything Aaron said agrees with everything I said. Honestly, I don't even disagree. I think Aaron did agree with a lot of Freedo's points. But I also think a lot of things that Sam says is completely true too. Like, the game feels better in the 2 format, and it takes pressure, as Spilo was saying, it takes pressure off of both roles. And one of the biggest points of contact is that, like, every game, I guarantee almost every casual gamer, even competitive players, could tell you that the reason they don't want to play tank isn't just because the experience fucking sucks balls, but you're the first person that gets blamed, and you're always, like, 90% of the time, the person who gets blamed because you're the only one in your role. And, like, people are also fucking stupid. They don't understand any, like, it's easy to know about rock, paper, scissors. Chess is a harder game. And, like, figuring out why your supports are fucking terrible, or they're not playing correctly, or they're not supporting things correctly is chess. Rock, paper, scissors is tank. People understand rock, paper, scissors. People don't understand chess. So it's easier to look at, oh, you lost rock, paper, scissors because you threw paper and they threw scissors. You suck balls. As opposed to, oh, you lost that chess match because you played too aggressive with your queen. They don't understand that. And it's like both formats have goods and have bads. Totally understand that. But it's like, pull it back, deep breath. You know, you're both honestly right in a lot of different ways. And it's like, I feel like a lot of people have gotten to the point where it's like so hyper, I don't want to use the word politicized, but I don't know how else to say it, politicized, where we don't even want to admit fault or wrong because that might make you look weak. That's it. That's all. That's my line of thinking. That's all.
There's a big victory here that I don't think we should have said at this point already. Kudos to Sam for fighting this fight for the percentage of players that deeply want this. I mean, what a victory. Like, to imagine, we would never have thought we could ever do. I mean, roll queue took years, man. I mean, this did take a while, but I think they would have done it faster if there wasn't the technical issues. So I feel like they probably didn't want to promise too much and under-deliver, but without knowing it, we were kind of in the dark, and a lot of the previous mistakes of Overwatch 2 were looming, and it felt bad. But, you know, credit to Sam for giving a voice to this player base. I just think we're advocating for two different types of the player base, and we've got 40 heroes, lots of game modes, lots of things. No one's ever going to agree on this. Like, obviously there's great merit to both, and we need to test it in order to see if the players agree with their feet of where they play. It doesn't really matter what they say they'll do. What matters is, are they going to flock to this mode? And I hope you do. And my prediction of this is, like, we're going to get a lot of Overwatch 1 players back to go play Ryan Zarya for a few days. For sure. Going to populate those queues. It's going to be a big moment for the game. But my question is, what's the culture going to be after that? What's going to be the baseline meta of the game? Where do we go there? And are we back to 20-minute queue times? And that, I don't know if I'll agree that that's a worthy trade-off, even if even if the gameplay is better, and I'm just not necessarily convinced it is, because a lot of the covering the bases and stabilizing the team, I believe you could do in 5v5, but players don't. They're not interested. They want to play what they want to play.
And then the discussion's going to end up going to, and this is, and again, just quick, Freedo, I appreciate you too. I think a lot of people, you know, misguide. The reason why you and I can have the conversation is because, like, we challenge each other, and, like, I've grown a lot from you challenging me, and I hope that I hope that's vice versa too. You know, and this is where the conversation might end up going, SVB, and this is, I hear Nateson in my ear right now. I hear him where it's like, is it worth it? And I guess we can end up going to this part of the conversation later. But, you know, my big question I'm going to ask everybody towards the end of this is, like, you know, if the queue times aren't sustainable, you try everything, say, you know, try it all in 6v6 roll lock, and they just aren't sustainable, was it worth it? And that's going to be a big psychological question I'm going to ask you guys towards the end.
Yeah, I think a really good point to have. I think all of you, again, you have my deepest respect, just for not just for how you guys make content, for how you conduct yourselves, but also, like, your minds, the way you come up with these, like, you know, strands and ideas and concepts. All of you guys have my deepest respect. That's why you're on the podcast, I'd like to say. You know, I try and invite people whose opinions I respect, and that's you four guys. I really do want to commend Flats as well for bringing this point up, because I think it's relevant. I'd like to dwell on it. I hope that you guys don't mind dwelling on it for a moment, which is that I do think this has been illustrative of where conversations lose their purpose. From someone from the outside looking in, again, someone who really stopped giving a shit a long time ago about this format discussion and just the whole thing around it. What's really concerned me is how much hatred has been thrown around in the midst of all this, like how much anger and vitriol has been thrown. I see it all the time. I see it in my comments. I see it in, like, even when I'm not talking about 6v6, even when it's like something unrelated to 6v6, I see it in my Twitch chat every day, people coming in just really, like, yelling about this. And I do hope, I recognize as a creator, I think something always to bear in mind and be important and cognizant of as a creator is your impact and your platform, right? So I'm cognizant that this podcast, a lot of people listen to it. And even the people who don't listen to it, they watch someone else react to it, or they hear about what we said, and then they kind of go off and they parrot that, or they feel some type of way, right? Like I can point, like, back when I used to read the forums, when I had enough brain capacity to let enough rot to read the forums, I remember like whatever we would discuss on the podcast, the next day, the next 2 days, the top forum post is arguing about something like along those lines or bringing that up. And I hope we can take this moment to reflect on this platform and just be like, just chill the fuck out, guys. Like, seriously, just chill the fuck out. Like, I totally respect wanting something in a game, being passionate about a game, but there are ways to discuss it and there are ways to just lose control. And I really just hope that now that we've got this, now that Aaron has addressed the issue, and I think this is where the devs can help by addressing these issues of being communicative, I hope that we calm the fuck down a little bit now to know that, like, hey guys, okay, it's coming. We can save our criticisms for whatever ways it manifests, and let's just be constructive about it, because I just feel like we've created this atmosphere where we really divided the community in a way we really never should have done. Like, I never meant, when we did the first 6655 debate, Sam, like, I never meant for this to divide the community. I thought it would be an interesting discussion point because there was a growing, exploration amongst people of like, how, maybe 656 was better. But in the end, it's just this last, however long it's been, many months since we had that debate, I reflect on it as just like, we ended up fucking the community a little bit, and I'm a little bit unhappy about how that happened. I don't know how you want to reflect on everything
I don't
that's
think
occurred.
it's on you at all.
Nah,
dude.
it's not your fault.
It's not on you.
Actually, me and you, we had the first ever 5v5 6v6 debate
I remember
back
this.
before the game even released. So it was there even all the way back then. So I don't think it's your fault, but I know what you're meaning.
I
Let's
don't
all
think
calm
people are
down.
tired of talking about the topic. I think it's the tired of how the topic has been talked about.
Right.
You
Yes.
know? And I think that's like where you have to have like some form of responsibility as a creator, not only to generate clicks, but to make sure that you're making things productive, right? And I think that like somebody like Sam has really done a good job bringing to light many of the issues. But the reason why I've always felt like I can have a good conversation with Sam is I never doubt like his intentions with the game, right? I never attribute any disagreements that we may have, minor or major, to like some sort of like idiocy or malice, and vice versa, right? So, and I think like that's like he's a smart guy, and I have no doubt that if like Sam was given the reins, like the game would feel a lot of fun, So it's like no one's perfect. Your identity is not 6v6. Your identity is not 5v5. That's not how it works. Everyone in this this conversation is way more nuanced than that. Like we understand, and I think the problem is it's not necessarily that we are, but if we have to be careful like how we communicate, because people will take something that I've said and then parrot it in a way more dogmatic, way less nuanced, way stupider way that makes me look bad and then causes a lot of conflict within the community. And I think everybody in this podcast has had 1,000 interactions like that, where somebody will parrot something you said, and you're like, wait, but I didn't, no, wait, and now you're associated with something that you don't even necessarily agree with. And I think that's the problem, I think. And that's where, like, sadly, we shouldn't have to have that responsibility, but we do. So.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on any of this before we move on? No, we good. Okay, awesome. I think good little interjection point there, guys. I think a relevant one, and hopefully I also appreciate. Hopefully the viewers will appreciate a little bit of break before we go back to discussing the nitty gritty of Aaron's blog. And so, in that interest of not repeating the same things over and over, I think let's talk about something that was genuinely new to us. The data on the queue times, because this was, I think, the deepest inside of the blog. I think this was the one thing that the blog was like, wow, okay, that is fucking interesting. Not that I'm saying that the other rest of the blog wasn't interesting. Brian wrote a great blog, but this is like, we've never gotten this kind of stuff before in Overwatch. Again, another shout out to say that like we never got this anywhere near this level of information in the early Overwatch.
It was all hidden. It was all hidden. You think you want to know the stats, but you don't.
Exactly. Literally, yeah. Like it was cool that we got those dev updates from Jeff Kaplan. And again, I don't mean to keep pointing that out, but like I think a lot of the difference we've seen in the dev team is not just in how they approach the game, but how they approach talking about the game. And getting this is awesome. Like whatever the state of the game may be, and whether you like it or don't, getting like this is what the queue times were and are like is awesome for discussion points like this. So, to quickly summarize, we can see on the graph for those who are watching on screen and for those who are listening, it says Overwatch average competitive role queue times. So post role queue 6v6, the average DPS queue time was 7.6 minutes. Since Overwatch 2, that has less than halved at 2.9 for DPS. For supports, it halved from 2.8 to 1.4. And for tanks, bear in mind we need one less. It's actually not halved. It's actually a little bit less than that. So it's gone 1.8 to 1.3. So I'm going to take it to Spilo first. Spilo, how do you reflect on this graph and the change of queue times? And did that make you kind of think, ooh, well, that's something I didn't quite appreciate the depth of?
Yeah, I mean, because it's me, I'm always like, well, but let's consider, and I was trying to think about like, okay, what tanks were meta? Did that affect the pick rate of those tanks? Like, would a Ryan Zarya, Winston, Diva perma meta have affected some of the queue times, right? Would that have made tank a little bit more popular? I don't know the answer to that question, because I think the important thing, like before we start talking about queue times, Morgan posted a really great thread on that SVP. I don't know if you have that pulled up as well, but like the whole basically where it's always the ratio that matters. It's not the number of players. So like the ratio of tanks to DPS, and then supply and demand, where that comes into play as well. And so I think even with those disclaimers, it's pretty damning, at least with the development of the game, the choke points of the game in terms of 6v6. I think that would be okay. If we're going to incorporate 6v6, we need to do some major work on making this role more popular, making more characters that people are going to be more invested in, being super attentive about tanks that people don't like playing versus and against, and kind of addressing things that way. Because even if you factor in with all those asterisks about risk and like, it's a big deal. That was way more than I even expected.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, we can. If there's anything specific you want to talk about in that Morgan thread, I'm absolutely happy to pull it up. I just pulled it up on my end right now, so I'll pull it up if you want to talk about it. But first, I'll take it to Flats. Flats, queue times.
The queue times thing is extremely damning. Like, I knew it. I think I watched J3 watch 9 seasons of Hell's Kitchen in a season of Overwatch. Like, every night you opened a stream and you didn't watch Overwatch, you actually watched Hell's Kitchen with J3, and it was great. It was my favorite part. And I would click off whenever when he actually got a game, and I would come back 10 minutes later and let him pick up on his episode. That being said, I think that is probably the most damning piece of evidence against 6v6, because what this game is carried by, whether we all like it or not, is casual players playing. If you don't have a casual player base, your game will not thrive. And as a content creator, you should want lots of casuals playing your game. Do they always know what's right for themselves? No, absolutely not. Like, sometimes like they think like, oh, like Junkrat's OP or Moira needs nerfs. And it's like, okay, guys, like relax over there. But what they actually want and what they actually need is a nice, healthy, fun game that they can actually just come home from school, from work, queue up, turn their brain off, maybe watch a TikTok or two in queue, maybe not even finish one, and then get a game. They do not want to sit there for 10 minutes. They don't want to play with their friends, get into a group queue, get a wide match, and it's a 35-minute queue. It's not what they want. But I'm also really sick of having to choose between two shitty X's. I got one over here, which is the 5v5 that we currently have, in which there's a lot of good, there's a lot of new players, a lot of exciting things, new heroes being released every few months, a great dev team, like more kill pressure from the DPS role. Queue times aren't bad. And then but I'm having personally a fucking terrible time because tank is awful. And then over here, I have the 6v6, which is like tank was much better and it was a lot more fun. But on the casual side, they felt like sometimes they couldn't break through chokes, or they would get stuck because they have ball hog, or you had the more oppressive metas, which granted you could say it was balanced with Brig and with BAP, and they even said that in the blog later on, the whole 4CC thing. It's like, well, you kind of did that to yourself. But there's so many things you could kind of look at there, and I'm so sick of looking at the two shit options. And I go, what if we did something better? And my proposal is 7v7.
Yeah.
7v7 with 2-3-2. Because the DPS queue time is more than double the other roles, you will never be able to, at the point, to be able to have that be something that is not ridiculously long queue. And with the current one, with you're currently at, right? DPS queue time is an acceptable level. But there's things that would hold it back, like the Switch. The Switch is such a shit platform. That thing is like my phone is stronger than a fucking Switch. Things like the Switch hold us back so goddamn much. And I think the Switch 2 is supposed to have like the power of like a PlayStation 4 or some shit. And I get it. And there's a lot of things that they could do, right? Like you'd have to like open up maps. You'd have to do all these things. But like it's a good problem to have at the same time. People want to play your characters. They like the DPS role. They want to play it. But like, is there not a world where we can all kind of have what we want, where the tank role can have synergy and have these things that actually keep themselves alive? The DPS role doesn't have 15-minute queue times, and the support role gets to also go back to doing a little bit more healing, but because there's an extra player on the field too, another damage dealer, they might have that ability to still have those duels and have those more DPS playstyle that some support players kind of enjoy. I don't know, because I mean, if we've learned anything from battle royales, people don't mind games where there's 50 people running around, but it obviously can be a lot to deal with at once. But also then we look back at the nuances of 6v6 and we go, well, we kind of liked, that you could kind of have ults comboing with each other and having these things interact. Ult combos kind of feel like they're dead in Overwatch 2, right? Like there's no reason to combo ults because one, they get turned off by one singular ability, right? Like an Immortality Field or Suzu. You know what I mean? Like Grav Dragon's like fucking long gone, anything like that. So why not? Why not experiment with something that could be better? Because, I mean, we kind of have two shit options on the table. And instead of choosing which of is the lesser evil, why not try to make something better?
I love it. I love the chaos theory of just like in the heat of the 5v5 6v6 fights, like, wait a minute, guys. I mean, I remember when you tried 4v4, you're flexible in numbers.
Well, that's
like,
the opposite end, right? Like it's like 4v4, honestly, like 4v4 has the same merit, right? Like, but the problem with 4v4 is like I tested it with CarQ a bit, it just felt kind of empty, right? Like already 5v5 when you put, if you guys remember when we swapped from Overwatch 1 to 2, it did feel like slightly more empty. It didn't feel that bad though. We were like, like, there's not as much pressure on chokes. There's not as much pressure in these situations. And like people, we were like, it's not that bad. 4v4 seemed too far in the extreme though, right? And so my line of reasoning here is we went from 6v6, which was like quote unquote like the preferred number when the game was made, right? Like Aaron, when like Overwatch 2 was in development, was like we were trying to figure out the amount of players we should put on each team, and the number was 6, right? And the reason they chose 6 was enough to have impact on the game without, like, you'd have enough individual impact, but also if you weren't having the best day, you wouldn't instantly throw the game for your team, right? Like, it was a nice middle ground. And we tried the 5 version, one less player, and it seemed okay. It didn't seem like it was that empty. It didn't seem that crazy, but it caused an adverse effect on the tank role especially. What if we went the opposite direction and added a player, but added in the role with the highest queues to offset that longer queue time? Because theoretically, it would be a 50% decrease, right? Because like adding an extra player, you cut down on that and make it more in line with the other roles, while also giving those other roles more utility to themselves, like more, especially the tank role, more synergy, more survivability, more things to come together. And you can make an argument at that point that there needs to be a major reduction in both damage and healing, because now you have more players, you can't have everyone doing so much damage and so much burst. So you would have to also bring the numbers down for everyone else, and it would be a good time to reset the damage creep and healing creep that we've had over the years.
I look forward to your arc, Flats, where for the next 1 year you only make videos trying to get 7v7 to be a thing in Overwatch. I look forward to that arc. I think, you know what, on this podcast, I don't like to be a hater. I like to say when someone comes to me an idea, I say, you know what, let's try and let's see the merits of this argument. So I like the merits of some of that. There are obvious, as with anything, obvious downsides. But I'm going to take it to Spilo, who took a real deep meditation there. Spilo, I saw you transcending to another plane as this idea was brought about. What are your gut instinct thoughts?
I mean, Flats kind of addressed pretty much all the immediate downsides, right? The engine, the map spacing, the healing responsibility, and then the potential for ridiculous burst damage that would have to be compensated in some way, shape, or form. Obviously there might also be something to consider would be the support bottleneck as well, where now we are assuming that support queues would be the same as tank queues in terms of demand, but clearly there's a lot bigger support population. So there's a bit of an issue there, but it definitely, on paper, would still be better than 6v6, right? Man, I don't know. Like, all you could think about is just like, it's just human nature just to be like, think of all the negatives instead of thinking about the positives. But I think, right, like, I will say this, that I am, maybe this is just like part of my brand, but I am less sold on the fact that there is a format that we just have to find and more on the we need to decide what format we need to solve, if that makes sense. Because if, like, I think this Sam will talk about this later. It's like, are we willing to let 5v5 solo tank be an issue, but we were going to have a lot of solutions on how to make it better? I've talked about that a million times. Are we going to commit to 6v6, make the tank role as attractive as we possibly can? Are we going to commit to 7v7 and address all the issues with that? I don't think there is any format that's perfect because of the game that we're playing. It's a first-person shooter with a tank and healer role. It's just never going to be perfect, I don't think. I just don't think that it's a high risk, high reward. It's just the formatting. I think we just need to decide what one we want to roll with and what one we want to put time into. Doesn't mean that there isn't 6v6 isn't better than 5v5 or 5v5 is better than 6v6. One of them could be better in terms of logistically the ability to solve those problems, or 7v7. But I don't think that there's like a magic pill that we just have to keep like trying to find. And I don't think Flats is saying that, but I just want to remind the viewership that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think a really relevant point to bring up. I also just agree with that on a fundamental level, where I'm like, the reason why I'm not so, bothered about what format we go is like, at the end of the day, we still got to balance the game afterwards. So I don't know. But again, I like to, whenever an idea is floated, I like to kind of give it some thought. So Sam, anything you want to chime in on either the queue times or the 7v7?
Yeah. So first, I want to define what a format's supposed to be, right? A format is simply a foundation to build a healthy game. At the end of the day, you absolutely have to execute on it and make sure that the game is healthy. And it's like the foundation that you build your building off of is crucial, right? It's the P and PEMDAS, right? The queue times I'll start with that because I want to get to 77. Someone told me in my chat Flats about that earlier, and I was like, huh. And I thought about it for a minute. Queue times is definitely interesting. I think it's definitely 5v5's like best argument, 100%. I think that's the most in my opinion, compelling thing that has aged well for the 5v5 argument is that, hey, you're getting games faster, especially in a hyper competitive industry. You got to get people in games. Like if the wait time is longer, people won't play, and that's super, super important. And I think anybody that's downplaying that, needs to take a little bit of a reality check on that one. It's super, super important, especially in BR games where the queue times are almost instantaneous, and Marvel Rivals, which will be open queue, are going to have instant queues, though a lot of the problems that come alongside with it. Okay, a couple questions about those stats. Where are they now, too, right? Because at the start of 5v5, but a lot of the complaints about the tank role weren't really there. And I think a lot of tank players who played tank in Overwatch 1 were still probably playing the role. How many of them stuck with the role, right? Especially given when a lot of the criticism about the role is that it's way less fun by a lot of different people. So I'm curious as to where they're at now. Though my guess is I'm willing to give them some benefit of the doubt there and saying this, they probably are about the same. But I would still like to see where they are now instead of averaged out amongst a lot of time. Obviously, I don't think 6v6 got a fair chance in terms of like introducing new heroes and balancing, but I won't hit on that one too much because again, like you removed a player, so like you're gonna get better queue times regardless. I'm not sure. I can't sit here and argue a hypothetical. Oh, it would have swayed at a ton. Like I'm not gonna do that, right? There's no way for me to do that. I'm not gonna waste my time doing it. As for 7v7, Flats, I never thought of that one. It's from a numbers perspective. Makes sense. Like obviously for demand, like if you just look at supply and demand, that would be a good way to get more people into games probably a lot faster. But what we're not seeing, obviously, are the gameplay ramifications as to what could happen. So I wouldn't be against trying it for a quick play hack and just seeing what happens, I had the same approach on 5v5 too, where I was like, hey, let's wait and see what happens. And as time went on, I think the problems of 5v5 begin to rear their head more and more. And I guess where this leaves me, and I'm not sure if we'll get to this now or later, was role lock worth it if this is where we're at? And I'm not going to answer that yet. I'll let Freedo talk about queue times first. But I think this is undoubtedly 5v5's biggest selling point, asset. I think it's the strongest part of the argument, given how things have aged, and I think it would be remiss to not acknowledge it for what it is. Though I would like to see the numbers where they are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a fair request. Freedo, you kind of already, at the start of this, earmarked like, the numbers are a little bit selective, but how do you feel on what Aaron shared? And then we can talk about Flats' 7v7 as well.
They are selective, which I say in Sam's defense to embolden and attempt to steel man, the arguments he'd make about it being balanced better and what would the effects be and if we made the role more fun. But at the same time, you have to take wide numbers, because a reality that I want us all to remember is that we simultaneously demand the game to be balanced while also being shooken up and with new content added. And the truth is, not every hero is going to be Juno, who I think more likely is going to be kind of a meta impact rather than an impactful one. Inoffensive, great. But does it shake up the game? Like that's my current feeling. I wasn't on the show with Juno and all that, but great mechanics, but maybe not oppressive enough or annoying or broken enough to do things. You often have to be a broken hero to transform the game. The math of this, well, first of all, more players play tank now because it's stronger. I actually like this patch on all three roles. I think it's pretty fun. Like when tank is a bit over the top, I think that's when it makes sense in 5v5. You're supposed to kite away from it, team shoot it, get the heck away. And if it's on you, it should do its job. And I think that's probably the way 5v5 should play. And it's how it played at launch when people liked playing tank as well. I preferred the burstier versions of the meta as opposed to the sustainy versions, but whatever. I think we can pretty easily solve a math equation on the tank players. And if we look on these large scale numbers, and tank queues or overall queues were one thing in Overwatch 1, and they're halved in Overwatch 2, we would have the same amount of tank players. That's what that would mean if you solve for X in that equation. So it hasn't really changed anything. And for me personally, I don't want to go too far into playing tank, but like I think I'm curious to what they'll do in the 6v6 or 7v7 version of the game. Will you have less buttons to push? Like, Winston has an ult fire now. Ram's got multiple things, and he's my favorite tank to play. And while maybe boring for Hawk to play, I love watching him play it. I love the character. I love slam this down, focus this, punch through that, shoot. Like my favorite tank in either game. And my question is, when we switch over to this, does that have to be tuned down? And then my performance is more so based on my teammate. I didn't quite get the video out making a follow-up to this whole 6v6 blog thing. And I was trying to pull up examples from the past. And I think like certain things that, Sam would say in praise as a good thing, tanks being able to explode. Well, oftentimes in like a meta rank game, you'll have a tank try to go take an angle in a good position, exactly where you're supposed to be, and the Ana player is sightseeing. It's just like, and then boom, instant dead. It's like, wait, hold on, I thought I was the tank guy. I thought I get to do this. And the benefit of this more forgiving design is that if the healer isn't immediately on your little health pool, and then you actually can, block or hold or manipulate the fight. And well, we'll see how they handle that when they actually do these tests, which is good that they're doing several 6v6 tests, because if they don't, we're surely going to be like, well, you didn't balance it right, or you didn't do this right, or whatever. I think the queue time argument, like Spilo brought this up, like what would happen if it was a Ryan Zarya meta instead of some of these other metas. I think we kind of already have data on that, because we know how many tank players we didn't have in open queue when we had less tanks, before the oppressive tanks or whatever were any good. So we didn't have tank players then when those heroes were the baseline meta of what you wanted on your team. And in fact, you would insta win, especially in a meta rank, if you had one of those picks. So I think we've solved for that already. Yeah, I think I answered to a lot of things there. So I'll just use that as a period point.
I have a question real quick. Would you say it's fair, though, to make the comparison about the Ryan Zarya metas to an open queue argument when we're talking about the metas being in role queue?
Yes, because the motivation to pick a playstyle in a video game for the average player is less to do with winning than we realize. And this is something we were more intimately aware of in Overwatch 1, and maybe it's changed. The community is more hardcore now. We'll see. Like the counter-picking intensity and the try-hardiness, so even in quick play, like Flat said, is different now.
It's not changed.
Well, in Overwatch 1, there was a lot more, I'm just playing Genji always, or Sim, or Mercy. I feel. Do we think one tricking has gone down or up in 5v5? Overwatch 2? Down, right? Okay. So, yeah, I lost the plot now. SVB. What?
You said
What was
that
I
you,
responding
to
the
here?
players don't
Win.
care about winning so much as they do
Right.
about
Right. Okay.
playing.
Yes. Exactly. So, and that was kind of the issue as well, where they would win instantly if someone learned Rhine, please. And now that they put it in gate kept that as the bottleneck for the queue in, we're now calling it roll lock. Okay, with roll lock, like it's the same humans. Like they'll just wait longer. And overall, I got to be honest. Like for me as a player and a content creator, didn't really mind long queues. Doesn't break the game for me. I'll just edit videos in between, like, or farm priority passes or do whatever I got to do. But when these subjects have grave ramifications on our game, and if I can, just one little aside here on the way I handle these conversations, to defend myself a little bit, I think people get the wrong idea when I'm so absolutist in reporting accurately. And the reason is because I studied media, among other things, and I speak or attempt to speak in a way that no one does in the universe anymore, which is I try to have journalistic integrity. It's really important to me, actually, which is why it's so hurtful if the community deems me a shill, and why I take so seriously, well, were any of my facts wrong at any of these points? Oh, no. Okay. Well, these things matter to me quite deeply. So I want to get this right, not because I want to be right, but because it's important that we as an entire community to get what we want and advocate for the effects that we want, not to ask for things we're not actually going to want when we get it, because we're just wasting the devs' time ultimately. So, I think it would have been irresponsible to say that at any point, queue times, to miss the word here. Misrepresent the reality of these queue times, which we know intimately based on the vast, player data. So, many shows ago, I came here saying like there's vast evidence on these things, and I think now that he's gone through the history of it, it's like I just feel validated, I suppose, that when we look through the entire history of the game, it's not just solvable with balance or design, I think. And we'll see with the new fun tanks. Maybe more people want to play tank now that you can cleave through things as Ryan or play Queen. I'm optimistic because the designs are more fun, but I don't want to lose all the cool things I get to do on my own as a 5v5 tank if we go to 6v6 or 7v7. Like I like the mechanics, Doom is outrageous as a hero in Overwatch 2. We never had any tank similar to Doom. He's nuts, dude. Like power punch, boom, it's to kill this, shotgun damage up top, I'm flying through the sky. Like this is awesome. But the tank role sucks as well, because we look at it from like a competitive minded point of view of, well, how easy is he countered? How easy does he die? And I don't know. We'll see if the game gets simplified down for the tank experience to be more simple, which is what main tank was back in the day. Do people want that now that we have a more competitive community? Because back then they just felt like a shield bot and didn't want to play it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it boils down to we're just gonna have to wait and see. We kind of have speculated a lot, we've kind of theory crafted a lot, but I think at this point, let's just wait and see what the devs bring up. I'll bring it back to 7v7 again. I like the idea of experimenting. And I think one of the cool things that the blog has shown is that the devs are willing to try different things. Like we'll talk about this as our probably last part of this discussion about the what comes next section and what Aaron has kind of alluded to as they may be trying in the future. But I'm gonna bring it back to Flat, since he brought in this was the hot. I had a feeling this when you said, I've got a spicy take to drop partway through. This is what you were gonna drop. But do you kind of how realistically do you want to see this experiment with? Like, are you kind of just saying like a little bit tongue in cheek, or like 7v7, or are you like, I want us to experiment with all kinds of formats, like whether that's 7v7, whether that's 5v5. I kind of want to see different versions of Overwatch. Try it out.
No, I'm dead fucking serious, but in a way that I want to be clear. Something we talked about in the last podcast, right? Overwatch long term, if it continues the trajectory it's on, is fucking cooked. Long term. There's nothing to look forward to. Nobody gives a fuck. Its reputation right now is beyond repair. Even though, in a lot of ways, they've done a lot of good for the game. And they've actually made a lot of great changes, whether that's through monetization, whether that's through balance, whether that's through customization options, whatever it might be. The stain of Overwatch 2 is immense, and it got worse with the cancellation of PvE because that was the whole point of the whole game. And you're never going to escape Overwatch 1.1. You're never going to escape what Overwatch 2 was originally supposed to be. And how do you break through all of that? The only way you break through all of that is something that's so radical, something that's so big that it actually gets people's attention and gets them to want to even pick up the game again. Because we're at this point, and I made the same reference to you before, but it was either you, SVB, or Spilo's analogy better, where you just pick up a handful of sand, and we're all holding the sand really tight. But it doesn't matter because it's going to keep slipping. Like the only way it changes is if you grab a new handful of sand or add another handful of sand. You're holding both. And I think that 6v6 will do that more than anything else right now, no matter what, period. That's why when I was walking into that blog, I thought I was going to walk out a 6v6er, because I knew that even though I think the game is better, not balanced, because tank fucking blows, but overall better today than it has been almost ever in history, it won't matter because people don't give a shit. And it's not the shiny new toy on the block, and it's not going to get people's attention, and people don't give a fuck. Even though people are dying for a new FPS game to play. Apex is on the decline. People complain about Fortnite all day long. All my Valorant friend creators are either not playing or complain about their game, even though they don't probably know how good they have it. CS will just live on for forever, but a lot of people think CS was better than CS2. Like Marvel Rivals right now is the new shiny new thing in a lot of people's eyes, but there's also a lot of skepticism for it as well. And some people don't like it. Some people think it's the fucking greatest new thing. I think it's a little bit worrying that the people that think, oh, this is the next hit thing, 100%. Dude, it's been like a week. And even the alpha was like, oh, it's only a couple weeks. Like you got so much more time before that hits the market. Like, you know, what happens like when it actually hits and it's like, oh, the monetization system's awful and the reward systems are terrible. And then once you start trying to play competitive for 6 months, like, oh man, shit starts going downhill quick. And it's like, well, they could just do stuff from Overwatch. Or what if they refuse to talk? Because I don't know if you guys have ever worked with Marvel Rivals at all or even tried to, but I've heard their communication, even with their streamers and stuff like that, is fucking terrible. And I don't know if you know anything about the whole drop situation they have going on right now, but it's fucking terrible. They are not the god. Oh, do you not know about the botting of the codes and all that shit? There's only like a limited number of codes.
Yeah.
And the keys only refresh at 8 p.m. EST every day. And
you have like them?
Oh yeah, last night I was literally had a countdown on my screen for like when it refreshes, and within 2 minutes, people were trying to redeem their drop codes, and it was straight up the website was fully crashed. They have go look at their Twitter. There's a whole tweet about it. They actually started running a giveaway for more codes when that happened. And
is that what that was?
Oh yeah, they start people replying. They closed their Reddit. They closed their Discord. They are not having a great time over there. They are not the fucking perfect savior of anything. And Overwatch is the same problem. Even though today it's a lot better than where it was. My personal prediction to you guys was if there's nothing big in the next couple of years, like it's just my fear is it goes into maintenance mode, because like if it goes into maintenance mode, you keep all your hardcore players, you just fucking pump out balance patches for them, and you pump out endless battle passes, and it's right now in this current moment is an endless battle pass simulator. And like Freedo talked about earlier, is like, you know, with either Overwatch feeling samey or like this is the Overwatch experience that you kind of like want, or like, you know, historically this is like what has worked better. Most gamers don't give a fuck. Like they want something fun to play, and they need something that gets their attention, something that's shiny and new. And 6v6 is that thing, because it would reignite a lot of people's nostalgia watch and be like, oh my god, I can go back and, you know, work with my other tank. And if it actually was balanced well, and it was like, and they had good content come out at the same time, and they dropped a fucking cinematic or two with it, holy shit, they could take back over for another 6 or 7 months easily. But do I trust their marketing team to do that? Absolutely not. They're fucking asleep at the wheel. And that's why I thought walking in I was going to be a 6v6er. And so like, to allude to the point of like what you asked me of like, am I serious about 7v7? I am serious about 7v7 because I know that it's not physically possible right now. And it was kind of like alluded to that there would be potential performance issues in Overwatch, and I'm sure we're going to get there in the blog, right? There would be performance potential issues even in the 6v6. What about a 7v7? Hell fucking no. And my original jump, which is what I alluded to at the beginning of the whole Switch thing, was the Switch is probably the thing that holds it back more than anything else, because that platform fucking blows. So you would have to drop support for that. And do you see the corporate people at the top of Overwatch and Blizzard dropping support for a platform and losing money? No, they're not that fucking smart. They don't see the potential future, benefits of it. They're like, no, we lose this platform, we'll lose X percentage of our sales of battle passes and skins. That's unacceptable. We can't do that. It's always going to be gatekept. So the reason I bring it up now is because even if we decide to go 6v6, say in a year from now, let's say the tests go well and we decide to go for it, it's only going to last about a year, best. Then people are going to be sick of it again, because all the same problems are going to rear their fucking heads, and it's going to be the queue times, or it's going to be the synergies are oppressive, or they feel like their tanks aren't doing anything. It's going to we've been here. We're not crazy. We're not insane. We fucking been here. And so the idea of 7v7 is I want to give you the idea now. So you got a year and a half or more of a head start if you want to start testing that and make it a feasible possibility, because the only thing that would actually get the general gaming community's attention at this moment is 6v6. And if they decided to implement it, let's say it goes well, it'll be great for a few months if they really market it and they really go all in on it, but it won't last. What do you do after that? And that's how you plan for the future, not just for the next 6 months. Because if Overwatch and Blizzard has taught us anything, is they're really good at tanking their products for short-term gains instead of planning for the future of long-term sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, I like the future planning, man. I like that you're already thinking the next step ahead. Or we go 6, then we go 7, then we go down to 4. Let's switch it up again, guys. Let's go back down
Overwatch
to 4.
3.
I'm honestly down to go 4. Like, if you want to go 4, fuck it, let's go 4. I just think it'll be more boring, but like that's just my personal take.
You could do like the arena mode that Apex had or whatever. Hey, what happened to my Overwatch BR idea from years ago?
Yeah,
guys?
you've
Come on,
been.
let's
I'm
do some
surprised
of
you
that.
did. Yeah, I'm
BR's
surprised you-
dying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, well,
BR
not
dead,
now. So
Yeah, God, too
so-
late.
Exactly.
You know what we should
Overwatch
do,
can
guys?
save.
What if there was like a highly replayable like PvE like Borderlands that we made? What if we did that?
Oh, stop.
Hey, Borderlands is coming, dude. It's coming. I'm waiting.
There's ways we can kick the dead horse, but that's just like stabbing the dead horse. So let's just leave that boy alone. Let's then. We kind of discussed this on the last call as well, Flats. I think we're of a like mind that like the game needs changes. We have felt this way for a while. The game needs constant refreshing. It needs shakeups. You can't like balance patches won't do it. In my opinion, balance patches will never reinvigorate Overwatch in the way that I think all of us in this call would like it to be reinvigorated. We've seen it's tough, and maybe there's players out there who are like, I don't care if Overwatch is top dog and top of the market. It's tough for us as people who love Overwatch, who to some extent love like Blizzard games, who have seen it shining so brightly, to see it now, be a turd, and that's just like lost in the darkness. So I think it's hard for us to not want Overwatch to be a better version of itself. So I would love experimentation, and to that end, let's discuss that section of the blog. So Aaron talks about, the reason they haven't done 6 sooner is that like with Overwatch 2 came these technical upgrades that basically mean it doesn't perform well on older devices, PS4s, Nintendo Switches, shitty computers, laptops, whatever it is. But let's say, for hypothetical sake, the 66 experiment goes well. Let's say people like it. The whole other task, as Aaron alluded to again, the Pandora's box. How do we actually then put it into the game in a way that is some way meaningful? Like, what's the next step? Let's say the experiment goes well. What's the next step? Do we create a separate queue? Do we balls to the wall, just shove it back into the game? What's the plan? Spilo, I'm going to take it to you. Again, in this world, the 6v6 experiment has gone well. What do you do from there?
Has to be put in full stop. Has to be done full stop. Not just from like a competitive integrity and a queue time integrity standpoint, because otherwise you're going to split the player base even further. That's going to be a major problem. But I also think that to echo Flats' thing, from like a marketing standpoint, that's an opportunity you cannot pass up. It's going to be controversial, but people are going to want to play it. People are going to want to try it. Now, obviously, like we'd still have a queue time issue, and obviously the engine and all that kind of stuff. But assuming that all that's like not solved, but like we've addressed those weaknesses, we think you can mitigate them. It has to go back to 6v6. I don't know if they're willing to make that jump, Obviously, we don't have to worry about that. We have to test it first, but like they have to be willing to that that's a potential end goal here.
Sam.
Please, for your own sake, make sure you're ready to drop the Overwatch 2 branding when you do, and do yourselves that favor. Like, I really want to see them go past it. I want to see them get past it. You know, I think it's as long as that 2 is on there, people will have something to point to. And if you end up going back, like, you could call it Overwatch something. I don't know what it is. But I think especially for this current team, who I think, you know, I don't really know any of them too well, but from what I've seen in their interactions is very different from anything that we've really seen in Overwatch previously. I think you guys deserve that for yourselves. I think you guys deserve a chance to go out there and show people who you are. And I think the way Aaron's presented himself has even like people like in my chat, like would get mad. Spilo, we talk about this all the time, would like throw a lot of flame to Alec, and then they drop Juno like this. It's like, dude, where was this like 6 years ago? You know, and Freedo, I know you don't think Juno's like a big meta changing hero, and I don't know if she will be either, but like imagine we got that instead of like Brig or Moira or something like that back in the day, what the game could potentially look like. We don't know. I would really like for them to get a chance to, you know, like I'm very, very much so pro 6v6 because I think the gameplay is what you should prioritize when it comes to making a good game. But I don't want them to get kicked in the shins, so to speak, which is very painful, by the way. You know, just being stuck on lumped in with what Overwatch 2 should have been and not. I would, for the sake of marketing, be willing to take the time and wait for that big boom. Flat, something you alluded to last week was like the light at the end of the tunnel for all those years in the dark ages, right? You know, even if it didn't happen, that light at the end of the tunnel still was pretty motivating for a lot of people who were still around. So, and you know, who's to say, look, I think 6v6 is better. Who's to say that they have to be in 6v6 every season? Who's to say we have to be in Rollock every season? This is why SVB, I kind of wanted this podcast to be named the Great Overwatch Debate, because I think with the implications of everything Aaron said is like, hey, like, let's question everything. You know, like what were we right about? What were we wrong about? So from a bigger picture standpoint, you know, there's a lot of questions to be asked, but you know, I think by the time season 13 comes around, it's what, season 11 right now. That's when that test is going to be. If it works well, like just have marketing be ready too. And then you kind of just got to rip it. You just rip it. Just rip it when you're ready, but still like start getting ready now. Just in case. Cause like, you know, I think Overwatch would benefit as an IP in general if they drop the 2. In general, whether it's 6v6 or 5v5, doesn't matter to me. I think that would do the team a lot of favors. And I think they deserve a chance to really redefine.
It's more than that.
Redefine
though.
the sequel, you
drop
say?
the 2.
Redefine the sequel?
Jesus fucking Christ.
You might say, Sam? Is that what you're about to tell us? Damn, man, you should copyright that quote, because if some
Now we found the shill, guys. We found the shill. I knew it.
I need some water. I need some water.
You need some water, dude. You need some fucking
Some
water.
whiskey.
Take a shower after that one.
So let the record show.
Okay, Freedo, I'll go to you, and then we'll go to Flats.
So much has been said, and that made me laugh so hard. What's the base?
So the question is simply, in this world, the 6v6 experiment goes well, everyone's happy. How do we actually make it, like, how do we put it into the game? Do we split separate queues? Do we shove it right in? Or as Sam says, do we start a rotating wheel where we keep mixing which format is happening when?
Yeah, I like that. I also, you know, I think Sam's revert Overwatch take is somewhat controversial, but the Overwatch classic branding, man, it's right there.
Yeah.
Despite all my complaints through the history of that game, it's like the mystique. Sometimes the perception is more important than any reality, and just lean into it, right? The truth is, with more players in chaos, the moments are bigger, higher highs, lower lows, and we have a casual community who I think flock to those things, and a hardcore community that wants a lot of depth. So I do see a path for this to be successful. I think like a good question to ask for the sake of objectivity and science is like, what evidence would you need to see in order to switch your opinion? And mine would be that the queue times are not unpalatable over time. And when there's enough competition to actually try, once the novelty of Overwatch 1 players coming back to play Ryan Zarya for the first few days, we don't see all the same problems of, you know, everything Aaron mentioned about the previous game. If those don't come up and you can move on the map, don't get locked in chokes. Like if we don't have the downsides, then yeah, why not? I don't even mind waiting necessarily for somewhat longer queues. I'm curious, where the needle falls for anybody on that, and where we would make that deliberation, because I do believe that no matter how fun tank is, or how deep it is, or how great the skill ceiling is, that it's going to be the least popular, because those numbers have sustained from both games. But yeah, I don't know if I answered. Rotation or switch over completely. That's where I would land. I don't want to split the queues. I don't even like splitting the queues now.
You could do rotation, like a lot of the big BRs, like a big problem they had, like Warzone. Oh, this made me so mad. Is they outright removed like all of our favorite maps. Like they removed a ton of them, and what they started to do instead is like every 10 minutes, like the map rotates, like from like Rebirth Island to whatever the other one, Vondel, or like a couple other ones. They're gonna be adding back Verdansk, and I will be playing. Finally, they removed my freaking favorite map, and I'm gonna be top hoss with the sniper. So it'll be a good time. But
I just remember the thing that I asked for like so long ago is like tournament modes, right? Like these timed events. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing, the quick play hacked thing, right? Timed events, I think, are great for this game. Like a really smart idea. And just real quick, because I wasn't on the season 11 show this week, but season 11 has been kind of packed, don't you think? Like, now that we have the blog post, well, it's almost over now, right? I mean, it's like we only got under a month left.
It was the 10 giga
buff. A month of not much, though.
Initial patch.
Yeah, but let's count it out for a second, though. Yes, a patch a lot of people didn't like, controversial, okay. But there was the experimental card thing, and then a quick play hacked, and then a Juno trial, and now this blog post. Like, I kind of feel it's like one of the more packed seasons.
Yeah, but it's front loaded. Normally that's spread out throughout the entire season. So like now we have like a month of like nothing. So it's like from here on out,
though, right?
It's like another month, isn't it?
You can enjoy your $40 Rhine weapon now.
That's true.
It's got to be less than a month, Flats, right? Because I mean, the mid-season patch was 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Someone hop in game and go see what it is. No, the mid-season patch was
early.
2 weeks early.
24 more days, 3.5 weeks.
So wait, it's the 24th or 24 more days?
24 more days. 24 more days. 24 more days.
24 more days is
that's
a little more than 3 weeks. Like it's front loaded.
Sure.
So everything got compressed to the front because the mid-season patch was only 2 weeks into the season. So it's the same amount of content as we always get. It just feels like more because it's faster, and then nothing for a few weeks.
Well, I'm gonna take it back to the original question. To Flats now, because Flats, I didn't get your answer yet, which is that if the 6 experiment goes well, how would you approach handling it? Like, if it goes well, what would you want to see happen?
Oh God, I feel like I should get paid for this one. All right, you want to actually do it correctly? Here you go. So you have, say, at least probably 8 months or more before you would have to, like, before this actually happens, because you have all of season 12. You have season 13, and that's like the time where you want to get people interested, right? So like you probably want something small for the actual like testing it again. Nothing crazy, but something enough to get people's attention. I don't know what they have cooking though. Like they might have some collab that's sitting in the background. They've been working on some cinematics, whatever it would be. You definitely need something with that, something small. But if you do actually end up going all the way, you got to go all in. If you want to go the route that Sam says, I don't think dropping the 2 does much, but what it does do is if you do go all in on the 6v6 thing, it's a chance to reinvent yourself, kind of like reimagine, like, hey, you know what? The 2 thing didn't work. You know, we kind of fucked up in a lot of ways. We're sorry. We're trying to do better. Here's like, you know, there's this massive patch, something that gets people's attention. It happens in other games sometimes with like, I know Destiny 2 had like a big like renaissance with like there's some big DLC that they dropped, and a lot of people were like super happy, like holy shit, like this is awesome. I don't know much about Destiny, to be fair. You have with Fortnite, you have like their whole like going back to like the original season 1. Hell, that would actually probably be a great event. Is if the first week of 6v6 they did an Overwatch Classic mode where it was just the original heroes, and that's it. And it's like, here you go for a week. That's all you can play. You can only play the Overwatch 1 heroes, and they can still be balanced or whatever you want to do the same way. And that way you do a timed event in game, and then you could even launch that with some types of cinematics or some way to actually start rebuilding your world, start rebuilding your universe, because you have all these new heroes that nobody gives a fuck about. Like, quite frankly, like, yeah, like they have like small niche communities that love them, but like they don't hit the same way as original Rhine, original Genji, Original.
Can you
Diva,
imagine a
original
cinematic
Bastion.
where it's like there's a 5-man crew of like Zarya and 2 DPS and 2 supports, and they're like struggling on this mission.
Yeah.
And then
And
out of the
fucking
mist
Reinhardt.
comes Reinhardt, shows up.
Yep.
Like I'm not even.
Yeah,
Dude,
yeah,
like,
yeah, they're
imagine how
struggling 'cause they're
hard
down
that
one,
would
and they-
go. How hard that would go.
That would go
Dude.
hard.
Yup.
That would go crazy hard.
That would go hard. And stuff like that,
Oh my
like something that goes beyond just the in-game, right? And listen, I've said this a few times. I feel like their marketing team is asleep at the fucking wheel. And like I don't know how to wake you up, but you don't have many opportunities left. Like you really don't, right? Like people already around the world, anytime your game gets mentioned, clowns on it like crazy. You're probably never going to fix that. But what you can do from that is prove to people that it's different and it's better than it ever has been at a time when they're wanting a new game to really get people's attention and there isn't anything to compete with you. There's a few, but I don't think they're as strong as of a position as Overwatch potentially is in. The ball's in their court. And unfortunately for the last few years, Overwatch in the Blizzard team has done nothing but fumble on the marketing side. And I don't even mean fumble. I mean, they fumble at the 20 and then they went back to pick it up and they kicked it to the 50 and then got back to the 50 and somehow stumbled on it, picked it up, actually got tried to sort of take a knee, got up, tackled again, fumbled again. And then the next guy came and he kicked it again and they fucking they took it all the way back to got a safety. Like, how do you even how did you even fucking do that? It's to that level of bad. So you want Overwatch to be fixed? You go all the fuck out. You spend some fucking money because the Overwatch team feels kind of cheap. They feel kind of cheap. They've never done the TV series. They never did it. They've stopped doing the cinematics unless it's paid collabs. They've stopped doing lore for their characters. It feels like it's an endless battle pass simulator with updates in the middle. Your game is on the decline and people want another big FPS title to pop off. Don't fucking blow it. Actually put some effort and you'd have a good chance. Will that happen? Who knows?
Yeah, I love it when you pull out the metaphors that I can only vaguely nod and smile about, Flats. Your American ball games. But I'm going to take it to Sam and then I'll move on.
Flats, you know what play it was? What was that play on the Patriots where the guy threw it in overtime? Like, it was going to go to overtime, and he threw it back to Mac Jones, and then the Raiders just ran Mac Jones over and then ran it back.
Yeah.
Who was the guy who threw that pass? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
That was one of the
I know
funniest plays
exactly
I've
what you're
ever-
talking about, though. He
My
just got
buddy-
fucking crumpled.
Yeah, my buddy Blake, who's a big Patriots fan, Ryan player too. You'd love the guy. I was in Discord with him when it happened. He was just screaming at his TV. So funny. But to add on to your point, it's not about like convincing people out there to not clown on Overwatch. It's how do you play the field, right? Because why do they like to clown on Overwatch? They like to clown on Overwatch because everyone received Overwatch 1 so well. So that's all the more reason to do that marketing that you're kind of talking about, being like, hey, like, just let's if you decide to go back, that's what you want to do. It's like, how do you play the field? You can actually kind of augment that discomfort around Overwatch 2 to like a positive and say, hey, like, we're going back. And that's the question. I think I've said this for a while now about what they should look to do is like, you don't have to like necessarily change these people's mind about Overwatch 2. It's like, how can you play the field and play like their own, like, it's almost reverse psychology, right? Where it's like, whatever it may be. But I think that's on the money. And, I hope to see it work out with regardless of what direction they go. And I'm still, if things change with 5v5, I'm still open to changing my opinion as well. I just don't see any possible way for that to happen. And I hope that either way, if they try rotations or do whatever, that they find a way to keep the game interesting and maintain good hero identities that make people want to play this game,
Yeah. I mean, again, in the interest of running down the path with ideas, again, the clearest parallel is just WoW Classic, right? It's like it gave them a chance to redo it, but also slightly tweak the mistakes they made. Like on the one hand, it was like, you guys like the original game. I know you hated a lot of the updates we made, so here you go, WoW Classic. But then, after promising initially that they were like, it's going to be exactly how you remember it, guys, as they then just basically began the journey of developing WoW again, where they were like, okay, here's an expansion, but the thing that you hated, actually, we're gonna tone that back. Like, the thing that you hated about this expansion, we're gonna fix that. So in a way, that is a path Overwatch could walk should they want to go down that line, which is like you get to redevelop Overwatch again, but maybe you have learned some lessons and you can say, oh, the stupid things you guys, were like, oh, this is bad. We won't do that again. Like, we'll learn. Whether they do that or not, again, this is all hypothetical. This is all theory. Chances are the mistakes will be made over and over and over and over, and we just kind of have to deal with it. But again, I appreciate all these ideas about what could be done, what path could be walked, and we'll see what the development team choose to do. Okay, I know it's been a lot of a call, so let's just move on to the last major thing that Aaron mentioned, which is the hybrid open queue system. Now, we kind of alluded to this a little bit when we talked about the open queue, but yeah, generally, just how do you guys view the idea of this hybrid open queue system, and maybe do you have any ideas about how you'd want to see it manifest? Like, what would you want to see?
Describe what it, because it's kind of your baby, So what do you see it as?
Well, I mean, it really depends on what Aaron means. So, in my version, or the idea that I've kind of floated out, I will confess that I've not fully ironed this out. Like, I've not, because I don't care enough, I haven't, like, solidified, like, this is how it should exactly work. But essentially, what I like the idea of is a open queue, but with a 2-hero limit. So, no more than 2 role limits. No more than 2 role can be picked. Players can flex between the roles. So, let's say, opening screen starts. There's obviously pros and cons. Let's say opening screen starts. 2 people pick DPS. Okay, now DPS is locked out. You got to pick support or tank. Okay, 2 people pick, 1 person picks tank, 1 person picks support. You're left. So there is a problem of the last player picking has no agency in that sense. You can get around that by having a flex role. I've seen the idea of a flex role be posited. Like, okay, you have 4 players who have set queued and then 1 player who's flex queuing. You can have, there's lots of ways to figure out a system that, like, you can have what Sam alluded to earlier, where it's like a softer role lock. You can have, like, you're preferring a role. Like, maybe you write your preferences down and the matchmaker doesn't give you your first preference, but it gives you your second preference. Again, what I'd be interested to see try is 1-2-2. So 1 player would be definitely, like, you'd definitely have 1 player in each role. So you'd never get the absolute mismatches of open queue where you never have a tank, you never have a support. But you have the flexibility to switch between the roles, which I think is the appeal of open queue. And mid-round, you could switch around. I don't know what Aaron is exactly speculating on. He says we'd like a sort of hybrid system. That's kind of what I liked. Sam, you said you wanted. Did you have your hand up there?
Yeah, I'm just thinking. Because I think I have something in my head, but I'm not entirely sure. So, like, what if it was essentially open queue? But is there any way to have, like, 1 or 2 people be, like, locked into the role? For example, like, if you queued as support, you say you're a support player, right? And you're looking to play support this game. If you queued as support, you were potentially locked into support that whole game, but other people could queue as flex, and so it was open queue, but if you queued support, maybe you get put into the game like, I'm trying to logistically, like, think it through as well right now, and I had that thought earlier, and I'm not sure. I might just said complete gibberish right there, but do you guys see what I'm trying to think here? Maybe I'm just totally off my rocker.
Well, again, so what you're alluding to is, like, flex roles and locked roles, right? So it's like someone is locked, other people are flex.
And how would that help queue times if that was the case, is what I'm trying to, like, think in my head here.
See, the thing about it is that it is very complicated. The thing about it is that essentially you still need to solve the problem of the tank, right? It's like, okay, let's say you're going 1-2-2. Would you have someone lock tank? In which case it doesn't affect the queue times. But if you have flex, then you might not have a tank.
Well, this wasn't intended for queue times. I think the way he was in the context of that paragraph, he's talking about the old open queue variability of, Jonak going from Zen to Roadhog, or maybe using Sombra in that support role. Lunatic High ran Toby, the Lucio player, on Torbjorn, on, like, Nubani A, for example. Really old reference, but, like, stuff like that, where it's like the strategical depth of swapping from one role to another kind of allowed for variance. So if the game is getting too samey, well, I think 5v5 definitely is the most samey version of the game, because most tanks like to brawl on the objective, generally speaking. The positioning is kind of samey, and especially as you see the higher level of gameplay, as it gets higher and higher, it's super samey, because the optimal positioning is solved, essentially. It's easier to solve because there's less of this complexity. So what he's trying to say is, like, could we add a little bit of that, but not 6 DPS somehow. Is there some way? And yeah, I don't get this idea really. Like I get why people have the appeal, but this is so far from what I prefer, which is like a reliable competitive experience that I can understand and know that it's gonna. I kind of want a little bit of sameness, but I also played Counter-Strike for years, which is incredibly samey. You know what I mean? There's set smoke positions that are meta.
Yeah,
You just
yeah.
always throw them. Like, so everyone's gonna have their different tastes on this. So yeah, I don't know if that
Yeah.
helped clarify to spur the conversation. I don't have a strong opinion. I don't think other than sure, try it. I want hero bans are my way of getting out of this, because if there's a locked meta of any given patch, then you might have different personal preferences on who you would ban. I mean, we don't have to go through that entire thing, but
apparently that went really well in the pro format as well. People were
Yeah, I saw
saying this week.
Avril tweeting that he said that the hero bans were like a huge success and like the best pro esport he's basically like Overwatch he's ever seen. Like it was really good. But of course, that's just
what was the name of the tournament?
EWC.
Oh, yeah, the Esports World Cup.
Yeah, I missed it. I need to watch it.
It's still going.
Well, it's still going on. They're still like, because they're trying to get like every game. This is the whole Saudi Arabia, sports watching. They're trying to get like every game involved to make it a World Cup and yada yada yada. Like the Dota Plar has already happened, so I was watching that, but yeah, I have not caught the Overwatch stuff. But yeah, I mean, as is a theme, some people will like this system, some people will dislike the system. It will have flaws. It will have benefits. Again, I'll take it to Flats. Flats, how do you feel about the idea of a hybrid open queue? And do you have any if they were to do it, maybe they should do it like this?
I don't think it's feasible. I think it would be too complicated. I think people would be turned off by it, or be like, this is just too much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way that there's so much beauty in open queue simplicity. Even though, like I said earlier, I'm against open queue, but like the simplicity of being able to just turn your brain off, hit the button, queue up, and then you pick what you want. But sometimes you won't be able to get what you want. Like, so either you get a flex or you'll lose, is so much better than playing this game of, okay, well, I queued up for tank, so I'm going to get tank, but someone else on my team queued up for flex, so they get to do whatever they want, and now they get to do whatever they want, but I can't, so I'm stuck. So you're almost like looking at them with envy. But the worst, then you can also have the reverse where it's like, I'm stuck on tank, but like this guy's so fucking terrible and on DPS, but they're on flex. Like if I could play DPS, it would be better, but I queued tank because I know I'm better on tank, so I did the responsible thing. They fucked it up by queuing flex, and they're not even good at their other flex roles. And it's like, it creates a new problem of like people wanting to swap with each other. And it's like almost why I don't like the idea of where you could like Sam said earlier, God, it made it a little bit more complicated than I liked, the whole role lock versus role queue.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, let's say there's a world I queue for support because support's the fastest queue time, and then I instantly lock DPS because fuck that. Like, you know what I mean? And it's more of like, because you're not restricted, you could kind of just take advantage of the system to get your own queues, and then you kind of create the same problem you had in the beginning with an open queue format where like people are wanting to keep DPS, they will abuse the other systems of, the priority pass almost by queuing it like, oh, I want to play support. Just kidding. Fuck you. I'm playing this. And it just like, it adds another layer of complexity that I feel like is just going to turn players off, and they're going to feel like people are dishonest with it. Or that semblance of like, some people have said before, I wish I could like request to swap roles with somebody mid game, right? Like, let's say my DPS is terrible and I'm on support, and I'm like, hey, why don't you just play fucking Moira or Mercy and swap with me on DPS? One, then you create that problem, right? Where like, you get that guy who's on DPS, or or hell, even that girl on DPS, and someone like, why are you on DPS? Swap with me and you can play support. Like, get off that role. You shouldn't be playing that. But that's a more extreme version, right? Where it's like people are saying, oh, you shouldn't be playing that. I'm better at it than you, so you should swap with me. And then you can go even further with that, where people can abuse that, where they queue for support, and then even though they're not that good at support or not that good at DPS, they just ask somebody in the game to swap with them, and then all of a sudden they can pop off. Like, how would the rank be tied to that? Now you have one rank as opposed to the 3 ranks that we currently have. As everyone's like, I think that currently the 3 rank thing is better than 1 rank, because some people are really good at tank but not good at DPS, or really good at DPS but not good at support, right? Like, it creates so many headaches and problems that it's like you're overcomplicating the game. to the point where I feel like you're going to turn a lot of people off to it. And that's like where I start to break off the whole competitive thing, where like people want like a very competitive shooter team based MOBA hybrid game. People also want the game to be fun. And if they can't even figure it out and they're not having a good time, they're not going to want to play it. And it just one too many layers for me.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate all those points. I do bring back to what Spilo said earlier, which is that I think it is like human nature a little bit to think what is all the negatives of a new system. Like if we were to go from A to B, oh, well, that would suck and that would suck and that would suck. Yeah, I'm not saying it would necessarily be good for the game, but I would like to see it experimented, and I think there are ways to execute that are better than others. Like there are simpler versions of it. I quite still think that the version I propose would be interesting to try. Again, I think there are definite downsides. Like the biggest one that I have is like you get like the last person picking just gets stuck on whatever, like in the system that I'm proposing, where it's like you can pick anything and it like gets narrowed down. The last person's gonna be like, oh, I didn't want to play tank, but you're making me play tank. So like any version will suck. But it's also like another one of those questions of like, well, do we gain anything from this? Or is there something significant enough gained when we try this? To that end, Spilo, obviously we know the negatives. Is there any version that would be more palatable to you, or is there appeal to you that you could see the hybrid open queue? Like, what would you like to see the team try out?
I'm not gonna lie. In regards to a lot of the suggestions that you've like what we're talking about with the queue, I have not put any thought into it at all. So I don't feel like comfortable saying anything, frankly.
That's fair, and I respect that. Like that's, I think, a good stance to take.
Flats
Yeah, I mean-
brought up the toxicity, and I think this is another pro for 5v5 because luckily we only have to have toxic attitudes towards one player. Just everyone's toxic towards the tank. We can all agree it's always the tank's fault.
I say we let tank be a sunk cost and just type MTD every game.
Like like the April Fools when the GG messages get replaced, it just GG becomes MTD.
Oh,
just
they
like-
should do that. Yeah.
just to troll people a little bit harder.
Oh, that'd be so toxic. Jesus. Oh my goodness.
Okay, well, this has been a behemoth blog and a behemoth discussion on the behemoth blog. It has been a slog, but I appreciate it all the way. Lots of great points made from everyone, and I appreciate all of your insights. Let's go to concluding thoughts. I don't even know where to what question to ask you. There's so many different strands of like what we could reflect on. But yeah, I guess just like what is for you the most important part of the blog that you want to reflect on and take away? Like if it's like, oh, the most important part for me is that like I'm glad they're trying 66 and I look forward to the experiment. The most important part for me is that like I just like the idea that they're willing to try different things and I look forward to seeing them try things. Or maybe it's like actually the most important part of the blog for me was the queue time thing. It's pretty solidified for me that I just think we want a game where the queue times are easier. So concluding thoughts, I'm going to take it to Spilo first. Spilo, give me some thoughts on this.
Two things. One, the experimentation only gets you so far if you do not learn the lesson from the experiment. And I think we've talked about some of the pain points with 66 in terms of the ult combos, struggle with breaking chokes, and so on. But I also want to have confidence that they understand the pain points of 5v5, because otherwise we're not going to really make the right decision with the information. You could try everything, but if you're not learning the right lessons, and so going back to my initial nitpick with this blog, the attention, I mean, I have to check the Spilo bingo, right? The psychology of the solo tank is still an issue. You have this big unkillable target, and going back to what Freedo and Samito were talking about, you have this OP individual that still feels bad because everybody focuses the solo tank. And that has to be addressed if we're going to move forward with 5v5. If we're going to move forward with 66, we have to address map design. We have to address mitigation stacking. We have to address the fact that there's such a wide variance in tank utility from something like a Diva Zarya, who are going to feel amazing in 6v6 versus a Roadhog, right? So whatever we have to test, we have to make sure that the quality of the test is appropriate by learning the right lessons from whatever we test. And then moving off of that into one other thing, there's a lot of discussion throughout the entire developer blog about taking feedback. There's even been some talks about, like, I don't know if you guys have heard, I haven't gotten any yet, but the post-game surveys, right? That's a hugely underrated tool that we haven't been talked about a lot because it's not very sexy, but it's extremely important because we need to learn two lessons. One, We need to remove the worst case scenarios. In fact, I actually think, I don't know how the system is right now. I want to say it was like bad, neutral, or good, something like that. But there actually, I think, should be 4 rankings. I think there should be the terrible. And I think that those are the things that we need to be looking at. Like, we need to go into that game and what were the characters picked? What was the map played? Was there a lever? Okay, when we have a lever, what map type? I had Gavin Winter in my chat yesterday. He was saying that King of the Hill has the highest lever ratio. That kind of stuff is really informative and really useful, right? Moira players, let's say, tend to rate their matches good, but if you have a Moira on your team, the worst option is selected 10 times more often than within Ana. Like, there's so much information you can pull from that, from the worst case scenario. And then the last thing is that we actually need to be not just looking about the bad things, because we all have a bias of looking at those bad things, even as developers. You need to look at when the games are rated as good, why? What was the map? What were the tanks? What were the DPS? What was the map type? What's the rank? How much does that person play? I don't know how much of this information is available, but it needs to be available. They need to be studying that. Not just looking at the negative outliers, the extreme negative outliers, but when somebody rates a game as good, why? Same thing with the 6v6 test. The people that like the 6v6, why? What was done right? Let's replicate that. That little microcosm right there, that meta that everybody loved, the season 9, the October 2020, right? Why are we not looking at that? Why are we not studying season 9 in October 2020, putting that under the microscope and finding out why? Because we can all think about why and come up with good reasons. Okay, then that needs to happen again. That needs to happen again. That, to me, is the most important development lesson, is you can't just fix mistakes. You have to try to do things that you've done well and lean into your strengths.
Absolutely. I think well said. And I think always this kind of more, as we see with the Q times thing, the more data is always helpful. Like, having these things that we can point to and say, oh, look, this was a change. So as you said,
Right.
like, also, you know, like, it helps with map design. Like, we've talked about this before, right? When, like, having a map ban would tell you, like, people always vote bad rating when it's Havana or something, right? Okay, people just, doesn't matter what comp, what balance state, people are not having a good time on Havana, so there's something wrong, right? So these things are all helpful indicators. I like that point a lot. I'm gonna take it to Flats next. Flats, what is in your mind like the most important takeaway, and like what you want to reflect on going forwards?
The most important takeaway to me is to never stop fighting for change. And whether you hate Sam or love Sam, what he
hate
did
him.
was admirable for the last year, fighting for what he believed in and fighting for change in the game that he truly loved. And I see the argument way too often from people when they say certain things like, oh, if you just don't like this, or you don't want to play this, or you don't like this game, or whatever, just shut up and leave. No, I think that's become the most toxic thing that I've seen in a lot of communities, where they would rather not try to fight to make something better, or to talk about or have a conversation on how to make something better. They'd rather just shut the fuck up and get away from them. And it's like, that's really dangerous, because that's how you create hyper politicized, hyper polarizing groups of people where they don't even want to hear somebody have a different opinion from them. And it's why I've always tried to be fair to both sides of, especially with Overwatch, my opinions on things. And it's why I have both the label of doomer and shill at the same time, because I believe on changing my opinion when the facts change, I change. Something SVB said before. And I think when people dig their claws in or dig their heels into something and refuse to acknowledge something else at all, it's when you kind of just create groups of people that don't want to have a conversation, don't want to make something better. They just want to win. And I don't think that's better either, but I don't think telling those people to just shut up and leave is the correct answer either. I think we can live in a world where you might not get everything you always want, but where you can also still have the conversation to express what you do want. And there may be others who think just like you, because there might be someone out there who's never said out loud what you've been thinking, but someone else puts it into words for you, and you go, yeah, I actually completely agree with that. I've thought about it, but I've never had a good way to talk about it, or never had a way to talk, or thought it, or had a way to express it. And so someone might be doing that for you, and you're able to support that person. And I think that's something that's also very important out of this, is supporting. And it's the reason why I'll support if they want to go 6v6. I'll support if they want to stay 5v5, as long as they have good reasoning for it, and they actually try it, and they actually give it a good shot, and they actually want to listen to feedback and enact on that feedback. because I think supporting people and supporting decisions and supporting people that want to make things better is much better than to tear down those people or to hate those people or to go against them just because they won't do exactly what you say. And especially as game devs, you can see it. It's fucking terrifying in any game where, if you're a public figure or you're somebody that's out there and you try to talk about stuff, like people are either going to love you or they're going to hate you based on whatever you say. But you have to have that moral foundation to believe in what you're saying and to try to do good. And that's why I respect this blog a ton, because Aaron really laid it out all on the line and spoke about why certain things about 6v6 were good and why certain things were bad, and about some things about 5v5 that were really good and some things that are really bad, and acknowledged both of them. And it was like, hey guys, we can disagree on how to move forward, but we can both be right on like what we're feeling, because it's all about perspective at the end of the day. And that's okay, because as long as everybody is in good faith trying to make something better, I think even if we disagree on the way we get there, that's how we make things better. Because if we all sat in the same room and agreed on the same thing all at the same time, we would have something called groupthink, and that's how you have really big disasters happen. Because I think Blizzard at the higher level years ago used to have groupthink. And groupthink, if you don't know what that is basically a bunch of people who are basically yes-manning each other in a room and don't ever challenge something, whether because they actually believe that the idea that they're all following is correct, or because they're too afraid to speak up and say something because they don't want to be ridiculed, fired, demoted, whatever it might be. And it's why I always try to surround myself with people that will challenge me on my opinions, even if I think that they might be wrong. I would rather be challenged and have to explain why I think I'm right, and maybe even find gaps in my reasoning to that I could go, shit, maybe I actually am not right, as opposed to having someone sit there and go, nope, yep, you're totally right. You're always right. Nothing's wrong there. I'd rather that, because I learn more and I grow more as a person. And I think hopefully we grow as a community after this.
Wise words, man. Wise words. Man after my heart, using the Keynes quote. And here's another one, I think, which summarizes accurately what you just described. Never accept the world as it appears to be. Always dare to see it for what it could be. I hope you do the same. Aaron, Jeff Kaplan's last words to us as he left the position of director of Overwatch. So relevant once more as he comes through. Freedo, I'm going to take
Okay, hang on.
next.
I'm so sorry. I have to stop for a second. How many cups do you have?
Spilo has like 8 cups or something. It's been like
something's
sipping on them
up.
quietly.
You talked about Sam doing something earlier. Now it's your turn. Explain it.
I think that's just part of the mystique, man. If I ever tell you it's like
that is another one.
Dude, that's a big cup.
He's got.
Does he have a small head or a big cup?
5 different cups throughout this podcast.
He's. I've been noticing. There's some with 2 handles. There's one with like a giant mug.
No.
There's one with. One
I don't know
handle.
what you guys are talking about. Stop! You guys are gaslighting me, I think.
There's nothing in them. It's just a prop.
Spot, and I'm gonna go back and find screenshots of every single cup. Don't test me.
It wouldn't be hard. It wouldn't be hard. Someone in chat has already done it. He's trolling us.
Crazy.
He's 5 gifteds. 5 gifteds for each mug.
I had to.
Freedo, your takeaways and what your kind of look to the future is, post this blog.
I think they're too gun shy to talk about these things. On one hand, this is a far way away, but they waited way too long to come out with some of these, because other than, he said, she said, the community comes up with their own memory of how these things played out, or it's tough to feel like in Overwatch 1, when you had a queue time, you just tabbed out of the game. So you're not going to remember it as clearly for how bad it was, basically. And seeing the numbers definitely helps. And that's, obviously just a reality of some of these things that I hope changes. I hope 6v6 does not have the same problems that it had in the first game. And I'm just really happy with, it's not been the most favorable thing to say, no, these devs, they're listening. A lot of people don't believe you. They think, well, where's the results? They need to do better. It's like, well, they're turning the corner. They're trying. They're understaffed, undermanned. What's that Hamilton song? Who saw the musical Hamilton? I'm outmanned, outgunned, and outplanned, or something like that. I don't know. I'm doing a
story kind of guy, so
Hamilton's a great musical. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm happy that they're willing to just experiment, man. Because no matter what, after doing this, as much as I think there's a risk that this is just too much dev time to go in a circle and learn the things that we've already learned, that I would not be so happy about. But what else are they going to do? Because enough of the community thinks this way, this is probably the only way you can address it. And with it growing in popularity, you got to adapt to the player base. And even though I think people are misguided on what the reality will be from their perception, doesn't matter. We have to do the test, and we'll learn and teach, I suppose, to the new players, especially who don't know what these things are like, what the effects will be. And no matter what, I believe the quality of Overwatch 2 will be better, or Overwatch Classic, whatever we end up calling it. It will be better after, this whole year of doing this. So that's good.
Yeah. I mean, I that's all we can hope for, is that the game improves, that the end product is better, because that's ultimately one goal we can all be united in, as Aaron likes to put at the end of his blogs, let's make a great game. So hopefully that's what we get. Sam, what do you kind of reflect on after all of this?
A couple things. One, I don't think it's fair to just say, for me, Flats fighting the fight. I think my mentality on different opinions in general has always been, I respect those who step in the ring, right? The people that just quit on it, or whatever it may be, I think that goes way beyond me. And I'm just one guy. I don't matter. But I'm prepared to admit that I'm gonna be wrong on one of my two big points. One, I might have to be at the point where I'm on Nathan's train and I'm on the OpenQ train. We're gonna wait and see what happens. But there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not thrilled about it, but for me, I think it might end up being one or the other, where if like 6v6 roll lock can't work, then I'm not sure if roll lock was worth it in the end. And I guess this is going to be a very interesting experiment to see, because I was very, very adamant about being pro roll queue back in 2019. I was sick of OpenQ. I was sick of a lot of the problems that it had. And, I was convinced that it can be better. And right now, I still do think that the gameplay offering of 6v6 roll lock could be the best. But if they can never find a way to solve queue times in a hyper-competitive industry where competitors are coming out, then you might, if you're going to do roll lock, you might have to do 5v5. And if that's the case, I'm going to have to do a lot of soul searching and thought analysis in general about weighing the scales. And now I'm also excited to do so because, we get to see a science experiment play out right in front of our face, right? With Marvel Rivals coming out, how well it'll do. I think it'll do well enough to be a competitor. To what degree, I have no clue. I will be playing Thor tomorrow. Inting on Thor, rather. Sorry, let me make that clear. Inting on Thor. But there's a lot to learn from all this, man. And I hope that people who have been very, very adamant about wanting 6v6 back can give the credit where it's due and do the right thing. And so at this point, I think a lot of the frustration came from the lack of acknowledgement and kind of how it seemed to come off from Blizzard when talking about this stuff, acting like it kind of seemed like, at least from my perspective, especially with a lot of tweets we saw on Twitter, or different things happening. I'm not going to nitpick them, because at the end of the day, let's leave it under the bridge, water under the bridge. We got to be productive going forward. It just kind of seemed like it was getting written off, and that pissed off a lot of people, including myself, because it's like, hey, I fucking love this game. What the hell are we talking about here? So I hope those people who were super irritated come around and actually practice what you preach. And when the discussion's being important, you take part in it in the right way. And that's on you as a person. And, I think a lot of people have a chance to show their true colors here and show, what side are you really on? And I encourage everybody at home to take the right choice when it's presented in front of you, because it's these, I think there's a lot of different things that define who people are. There's a lot of different moments in life. I think the biggest things are, in the right moment, do you make the right decision consistently and trying to be a part of the solution? And this is one of the big reasons why I always love coming on the show, is because I know that you guys are. And man, think about the shit that we've been through, boys. Oh my God. From I remember meeting Freedo for the first time, SVB. I remember when he introduced me to your content, he said hey, this SVB guy, he's doing this kind of content, he's pretty cool. And those are fond memories. Flats, first meeting you in 2020, I think, was it that tournament we played in together with Jay and Emong and everybody?
Yep.
And And then Spilo, dude, from the phase 2 days, Salt Shaker, man. I mean, Jesus Christ, that was a team, man. Oh my God. Sometimes it's important to take a look back, and in order to move forward, you got to look back, and that's something that I've like really been trying to do better, I guess, in the past year or so. And it's a growth process, and like ultimately, like I never, like you guys know me, I got the fire in the belly. I never want to get rid of my fire in the belly because I think it's what helps me push myself in a way that I never would have been able to, or I just would be sitting on the sidelines otherwise. And there's definitely things that I wish I could have done differently, and I want to make sure that going forward we can keep getting it right, and that goes for all you guys, So, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to Aaron and the team for taking the time to just acknowledge it and talk about it and be forward with us. And damn, I hope it works for everybody. I hope it works. That's all I've ever wanted, and I appreciate the effort. And we'll always try to find the right ways to challenge you guys in a healthy way. And if we go too far, smack us down with the fly swatter. And if you go too far, we'll smack you down with fly swatter. And that's what good teammates are for. Learned that in Little League, though we used freaking rat tails and baseball bats and gloves, but a little bit different there. But it's being a part of that team and being a part of the solution matters. And I'm grateful to have that opportunity. So
Absolutely, and I'm grateful for this team. I'm grateful for the squad, for the gang that keeps coming through, that keeps having awesome discussions. And yeah, I always feel like we come away with a lot of like interesting ideas and thoughts thrown about, and I hope that that's always valuable to the community. I hope that keeps being valuable to the community, to just kind of like, hey, I didn't really think about it that way, because I think that's the great thing of having all of us in the call together. Like, as Flats alluded to earlier, like stuff on Twitter sucks. When you're on your own stream, it's like you're only thinking about your own POV. You're only thinking about like what I feel. Whereas when you start like bouncing around those, you're like, oh yeah, that's true. Actually, I didn't really think about that. Or, oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Like that's cool. So I appreciate the squad for coming through. I do, again, appreciate Aaron putting this out. I think it's unprecedented, really, for the higher-ups in Blizzard to kind of give this level of, like, this is what we're feeling, this is what we're thinking, and we know we kind of did this wrong. Was it even the right decision? I think that's another really rare thing for Blizzard to say, is, like, we're not even sure if we made the right call with this. We're kind of gone with Roll Q and 5v5, but we don't even know if that is the right call or not, so you guys help us out. So hopefully this test will help them out. Hopefully we'll learn either way some lessons about Overwatch, what's good, what's bad, what's better, what's worse. And I look forward to the journey when we get there, guys, and what breaks loose, what demons are released, and what knowledge is gained when those tests finally come through. Until then, to Spilo, Samito, Flats, and Freedo, my eternal gratitude for joining me once again, guys. Is there anything you want to say before I let you get going?
How long you been doing this show, SVB? I think I tried to find our first episode, and I think it was 3 years ago.
2019, I think.
Jesus. I mean, I don't remember
right?
when we first ever had the episode of the podcast, but like, yeah, the OG squad. I remember it was called like the Great Save Overwatch debate, because I think I got all you guys on, because this was Crisis Days Overwatch, when we were like, this shit is in the dumpster.
2020, right?
I don't even remember now. It might have been
2020. It's on your main channel. It's just
yes, it is. Yes, yeah, it's not on the Group Up podcast. Because I remember, I think the first time I had Flats on the podcast was for one of the first Great Tank debate. I think that was the first time I had Flats on the podcast. But I can't remember when the first time. Well, I think the first four of us was the Great Save Overwatch debate, when I wanted your ideas on how the fuck we save dumpster level Overwatch, and here we are now, still coming up with
still
ideas.
Trying.
still 3 years later, still like, you know what? I think we need something different, man. We need to do something. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you guys.
There is one big takeaway, man. Frick Big Kale, right?
That's right.
Fuck Big Kale.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, frick. Remember, so you got to use the right finger. Remember.
Yeah.
Frick Big Kale. Frick Big
Very
Kale, guys.
feels very- Oh my God. All right, gentlemen. I'm going to go play some Black Panther. I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good one, guys. Peace
Cheers,
out.
all.
All right.
All right, bye.
Cheers.
See you,
Bye-bye.
fellas.